What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video and back with another format guide. Now, if you're not familiar with these format guides, basically what I do is I go through all the new cards added to a given format and discuss what that means for the decks involved. But for this format specifically, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is not going to be related to the major defining features of this format, because this format that I'm going to talk about is Frog format, which is based around the 2010 August SJC Indianapolis, and which is probably one of the worst formats that I've covered on the channel. I mean, different strokes for different folks, right? There are going to be people out there who probably do enjoy this format just for the crazy stuff you can do in it. But for me, this is definitely not my cup of tea, because the format does have a predominant FDK deck. Whether that deck is the best thing in the format or not, that is maybe up for some debate. But regardless, it's one of the better FDK decks in the game up to this point, and so it does come to define the meta a fair bit. But we'll get into that FDK deck specifically later. For now, we're going to talk about all the new cards added from Frog format. That were added to Edison format, which is the format that takes place basically directly before this, which is based around the SJC Edison of the same year. So I'm going to go through this video, with the understanding that you probably have some grasp of Edison format, because it is one of the more popular retro formats out there. And since Frog format does share a ban list with Edison format, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the ban list. This is the same ban list as Edison. So it's got the same set of forbidden cards, limited cards, semi-limited cards. I will be going through some of it a little bit, because for the channel coverage specifically, I just finished up wrapping up the coverage of Lightsworn. And Lightsworn format does have a bit of a different ban list. So, if you just watch my videos and that's how you're familiar with Retro Yu-Gi-Oh, definitely, check out some Edison content, because there's a lot out there. But also, don't worry, I will be covering some of the changes to the list from the September 2009 list that Lightsworn format uses. But I'm not really going to go through the ban list here, because it's the same as it was in the previous format. There aren't really board wipes. I guess I'll just mention that. There's no Dark Hole, right? Heavy Storm is still legal, so that's, basically the one board wipe in the format. But other than that, there aren't really any of those. Not really any hand rips besides Dust Shoot. And those are like the big things. Yeah, I'd say those are probably the biggest things from this list. I guess there are some low power cards like Magician of Faith, which are also here banned. But overall, you can look through the forbidden cards here if you really want to know what to avoid in the format. But generally, when you're talking about a given format, the forbidden cards are not going to define the format as a whole. What largely defines a format in terms of like powerful cards running around in it are the limited cards, the semi-limited cards, things like that, because those you can actually see in your game. So let's dive in to the limited cards now and see what changed from Lightsworn format. So for the limited section, I will actually touch on each of these briefly, but again, if you're familiar with Edison format, you can kind of skip over this section. If you're familiar with Lightsworn format, there are some slight changes here, but a lot of this will be familiar to you. So I'll highlight the changes when they come, but for now, let's just go through the card by card here. So we got Blackwing Gale the Whirlwind, because it is a very versatile tuner that can have your opponent's stuff. And also, if Blackwing to decks this more copies, that deck would be utterly broken. We got Card Trooper here, which is a very good, basically 1900 beater on your turn. That also draws you a card, Mills, so very, very good. Chaos Orc is now at 1. This was at 2 in Lightsworn format, which is kind of crazy for Twilight Sworn decks, decks that wanted to play Lightsworn engines, but also have dark cards to fuel things like Chaos plays. Now this thing's at 1, so that's a bit less easy to do. Dad is at 1 for whatever reason. I don't know why this thing was never forbidden, but this thing, very powerful boss monster for dark decks. Stratos here is good for the hero engine, still at 1 copy. We've got Gladiator Beast Bestiari here, also at 1, because Glads can be very strong if they have more access to ways to get into Geysiris. We've got Gores at 1, just a very good card to play around, to know about. We've got Lumina here at 1. This thing was unlimited in Lightsworn format. Now it's at 1 because Lightsworn was a bit too strong, so they wanted to curb the power of that. Marshmallow here, also at 1 to stop, I guess, burn decks, I guess. Mizuki here at 1 as well to hamper the power of zombie decks. This thing was at 2 in Lightsworn format, and that made zombie decks there a little bit better, along with having the full access to the Lightsworn engine. Here, it will restrict their power quite a bit. We've got Mind Master at 1 to prevent weird like OTKs or FTKs. We've got Morphing Jar here at 1 to curb the power of Empty Jar, I guess, but this thing could probably come off the list, honestly, at this point in the game's history. Necro Gardener is now limited. This thing was not limited beforehand in Lightsworn format, which was very good for the Lightsworn engine, because they were just able to play a bunch of these, get a bunch of battle stoppers. Now this thing is limited to hit that deck. We've got Necroface at 1 as well. This thing was at 2 in Lightsworn format. This thing is only really used in weird sort of banish decks. And you can do sort of like an Empty Jar banish deck with this thing, but with it being at 1, that deck is kind of unviable in this format. We got Granbull at 1 copy as well, just a very versatile monster that can act as a kind of difficult form of removal for some decks to deal with. We got Plague Spreader Zombie here at 1 as well. Very, very good tuner. And, you know, having it at 1 is still accessible in a variety of decks, but means that you can't just have a bunch of ways to synchro spam. We've got Rescue Cat also at 1. I think, you know, this is a pretty good hit. It can help out certain decks like X-Sabers, but realistically, most decks won't play this thing. Glads could also play this thing if they wanted to. We've got Sangan here at 1 copy. It's been this way for quite a while, but having access to more than one of a searcher of this caliber would be, you know, kind of broken for a lot of decks. We got Snipe Hunter at 1 copy here as well. Now, is this thing the best thing on the list? No, I'd say not, but it can definitely cause a lot of sacking potential. And so having this at more than 1 copy, probably not the move. We've got Spirit Reaper here also at 1. Again, kind of like Marshmallow, it reduces the power of certain decks to stall, so I think it's a good hit on there. We got Summoner Monk also at 1 to prevent certain combo decks from popping off. Tragoedia at 1 as well. Now, this is also a new thing when you're coming from Lightsworn into the Edison format ban list. You know, Trago's is a very powerful hand trap. It kind of like Gore's, it should be at 1 in my opinion. Yeah, I will talk about some other monsters here. We got the 5 pieces of Exodia and Night Assailant also on the list. These don't really, I mean, they're here for good reasons, I think, but like, realistically, they're never going to come up. Night Assailant's just at 1, so that way you won't be able to hand loop with 2, and Exodia is here largely for flavor. Maybe if this thing was at 3, you know, Exodia decks would be slightly more consistent, but I really doubt it at this point in the game's history. But yeah, I put those in the side deck slot because realistically, they're never really going to come up like some of these other cards might. We've got Advanced Ritual Art going into the spells to stop the power of certain ritual decks like Demise. We've got Allure of Darkness now at 1. This thing was semi'd in Lightsworn format now at 1 because it's a very good consistency booster for a lot of dark decks. We got BrainCon at 1. Thank goodness. This thing is absolutely busted and can just swing the game around in your favor. We've got Burial from Different Dimension at 1. This thing was unlimited as well. But, you know, certain decks can really take advantage of having this at more than 1 copy, and it can be very, very broken in those decks. So it makes sense why this thing is hit. We've got a Card Destruction here at 1 now to prevent certain mill decks, I guess. Or I say now, but this thing's been limited for quite some time in the game's history. Charge of the Light Brigade also at 1. This thing was unlimited in Lightsworn format, so you can really see that they're taking a hatchet to the Lightsworn deck. The deck can still play, and, you know, there are different variants like Christiansworn that maybe are now more prominent. But again, you know, as I mentioned at the top of this video, that's more for Edison that they can play there. In this format, you know, there's certain decks that are kind of too dominant that box it out. Cold Wave at 1, very, very good in certain decks that, you know, really want to pop off without using their spells and traps and want to prevent their opponent from being able to use their spells and traps to stop it. We got Destiny Draw here. This thing was at 2 in Lightsworn format, now at 1. I don't know why they hit it. I don't think hero decks necessarily, you know, were that crazy, but I guess they wanted to limit the power of them even further. We got E-Telly at 1 here. You know, probably good because Teledad was a very good deck earlier on the 5D era, and there are certain, you know, psychic decks that could potentially pop off with E-Telly at multiple copies. We have Foolish Burial at 1. This thing was at 2. Again, to hit Lightsworn mainly, I think, but also to hit certain decks like Zombies, I guess, as well. Probably good to have this thing at 1 because it is a very, very powerful card for a variety of decks. We have Future Fusion also at 1. Yeah, this thing's been limited for quite some time for good reason. This thing is one of the most busted ways to set up your graveyard and also get out a powerful monster in a couple turns as well. We get Giant Tornado at 1 copy along with Heavy Storm, the Spell and Trap Sweepers. I think these are healthy to have at 1 each because, you know, your opponent need to worry about them being in the game. You know, not many decks play Giant Tornado unless they're like also playing Cold Wave. But Heavy Storm is something that you sort of need to wait out, and you can't really commit too many back row, you know, for risk of it being stormed. Although Starlight Road is in this format, so, you know, that is a way to counteract Heavy Storm. But having that one lead to good mind games, in my opinion. Level Limit Area B at 1 copy, along with some other stall cards like Sword of Revealing Light, Gravity Bind, Wall of Revealing Light, things like that, just to stop certain stall decks from being too powerful. We got Limit Removal also at 1 copy, stop machine decks. Megamorph also at 1 copy. This thing could be off the list, but this is a relic of past times. We got Minecon at 1 copy, just like BrainCon, very, very good card. Especially in the Synchro era, this thing is very good. We got Monster Gate and Reasoning both at 1 to box out, I guess, Reason Gate decks. We get MST also at 1. Again, limiting the amount of spell and trap removal in the game, or at least proactive spell and trap removal, because Death Tornado is at 3, but MST can be used on your turn, so it's very good. 1 for 1 is also at 1 copy here, which makes sense. It's a great combo enabler, and with certain decks in this format, that we'll talk about later, this thing being at more than 1 would be absolutely busted. Overload Fusion at 1, kind of like with Fufu and Megmorph and Limited Removal, this is sort of a relic of past time when machine decks had something broken they could do with it. I don't think it would really make a splash now if it was at more than 1 copy here, but, they're being better safe than sorry, I guess. Rhoda also at 1 to, sort of limit the power of certain warrior decks. Scapegoat at 1 to, again, stop some stalling, just like swords. And then moving on into the traps, we got Call of the Haunted at 1 copy, Graveyard Recursion, very good. Ceasefire at 1 to curb the power of certain burn decks, Gravity Bind, and Wall I mentioned. Trap Death Shoot here because this thing is absolutely toxic and honestly should be banned. But this is sort of the one hand rip in the format. That you can just use basically for free. Torrential Tribute at 1 to blow up the board. And kind of like with Heavy Storm, TT and Mirror Force are things that your opponent has to play around. And I think it's healthy that they're at 1 in this format. Magic Cylinder also at 1 to limit the power of burn decks. Mind Crush at 1. It's kind of like Death Shoot, where it is a very good hand rip. Takes a little bit more work to make work, but it's very, very good. This thing was at 2 in Lightsworn, but they limited the power of it because it's very, very strong. We got Ojama Trio also at 1 to limit the power of certain burn decks. Return for the Different Dimension at 1 because this thing is broken in certain decks like Value Turbo. They can really take advantage of it. We got Solemn Judgment here also at 1 as a pretty good counter trap. And Transfiguration Prophecy to disrupt certain graveyard plays. I think DD Crow is better than this thing in like pretty much every situation, but this thing got the hit instead. For the last trap, we've got Magical Explosion. This thing was unlimited, but now it's at 1 because having this sort of FTK deck in the game is not good. But realistically, you'll never see this thing because this being limited basically destroys the FTK deck. So I put it in the same side deck with the Exotic Pieces and Night Assailant. Moving on to the Synchros, we get Black Rose Dragon at 1 copy as well, because that thing is very good. It's just a very good card. Volume of the board is busted. Brio also at 1. This thing was not at 1 in Lightstorm format, but now it's here because this thing is one of the most powerful synchro monsters in the game at this point. And we get Goyo Guardian. Speaking of good level 6s, also limited to 1 copy. And as a note, this thing uses the pre-errata version where you can make it with a non-earth tuner as well. So yeah, very good synchro picks there. But let's dive into the semi-limited section to close out the discussion of the ban list. Diving into this semi-limit, if you're coming from Lightsworn format, this got a lot of new inclusions. It's kind of interesting how going from Lightsworn to Edison, they sort of started just swapping things from the limited and semi-limited section, just trying to fine-tune the deck's power levels a little bit without, banning pieces outright. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing in ban list history. But it does lead to sort of just minor adjustments if you're going from one to the other to sort of get adapted to. Anyways, Sidra is now limited to 1 copy, or to 2 copies. It was limited at 1, and now it's at 2. Because the thing is very good, but it's not like busted anymore. Dandelion at 2 copies as well. It was limited. I think honestly this could remain limited, but they're putting it at 2, which I think is probably fine. We've got Mally here at 2, where it's been for quite some time, because this thing is basically the mascot semi-limited section for quite some time in the game's history. We got Goblin Zombie here at 2. This was at 2 before, but being here limits the power of certain zombie decks. Honest now at 2, it was at 3, which made Lightsworn a lot better in Lightsworn format, but now it's at 2, so there's less of those to worry about. JD also at 2. This thing was at 2 before, but having it here limits the power of Lightsworn just a bit more. Lone Fire Blossom at 2 was at 2 before, but having it here limits the power of certain plant decks. Treeborn Frog at 2, it was at 1, but I think they realized that having the thing at 2 isn't that big of a difference. It can be a bit of a difference if you're up against Frog deck, which, we'll talk about Frog decks later. The reason this format is called Frog format. But realistically, this is not, having this at 2 versus 1 is not going to be the make or break for Frog decks. We got Demise at 2. This was at 1, but honestly, Demise is not going to do anything in a format of this power level. We got Black Whirlwind at 2 to limit the power of certain Blackwing decks, which I think is good because that deck is very strong. At least it is in Edison. Chain Strike at 2 to limit the power of burn decks. Gold Shark at 2. Just because it's a good card that you probably don't want to have 3 of, or else decks could maybe get too consistent. Magic Stone Activation at 2 to curb the power of certain FTK decks. United We Stand at 2. This thing was at 1 for quite some time. Now they're bringing back to 2, which I think is a good change. This thing does not need to be on the list at all, in my opinion, but it's a relic of a bygone era. We got Bottomless at 2 because it's just a good piece of removal. Road Decree at 2. Because being able to shut down all your opponent's traps can invalidate certain strategies. So they don't want this thing at 3. We got Royal Oppression at 2. This thing was unlimited, but they're sort of realizing the power of it, so they're limiting it down, which I think is a good thing. Skilled Rain at 2. Again, this thing was unlimited, but now it is at 2 because this thing is very good at boxing out certain decks. And Ultimate Offering at 2 to curb the power of things like gadgets. For the cards that are no longer restricted that were on the list, Smashing Ground was limited. Mask of Darkness was semi. Both these things are off because Smashing Ground is a fair piece of removal, and Mask of Darkness is not doing anything in this format, let's be real. But that's going to do it for the semi-limited list here. Let's dive into the new cards that were added from Edison format to Frog format and see how they sort of change the metagame. Now, in between this format and Edison format, a lot of new sort of archetypal cards from Hidden Arsenal were added. Some new anime archetypes were added as well, or at least fleshed out further. And that makes up the majority of the new cards added to the format. So I was debating starting there, but I think honestly, that'd be kind of burying the lead because basically out of all the new cards added, one card sort of takes precedence over all the rest. And that card is Ronintoadin. So I figured I'd just start in this section, which sort of focuses on the archetypes outside of the Hidden Arsenal and anime archetypes. I will discuss those after because there are some meaningful changes that get added there. Some decks that you can play now that were less viable than in Edison format before they had support. But realistically, Ronintoadin is the big thing that you have to know about here for this format, at least. If we're talking about the format after this one, then looking at the new cards added here will actually make a difference because it does make some very strong decks. But Ronintoadin fuels a deck called Frog FTK, which I will show off an example deck list of later in the video. But Frog FTK basically has you cycle through all the frogs in your deck with something like Substode, get Ronintoadins in graveyard through things like Swap Frog, and just use Ronins to fuel more Substode plays, and basically draw deep into your deck with other draw cards and things like Poison Draw Frog to get into Mass Driver. And once you have Mass Driver and Ronintoadin with enough frogs in grave to fuel it, you can basically burn out your opponent for all their life points. And that is the basic premise of Frog FTK. And without Ronintoadin, that deck is not enabled, even though all the other pieces of the deck were legal before this. But Ronintoadin makes it so that they can just keep getting a body onto board and just burn out the opponent. So this thing is absolutely broken, disgusting card, and it will cause some bans coming up on the next list because Frog FTK is very strong. Even if it's not the best deck in the format, which, I would say maybe there hasn't been enough testing to tell whether it's the best deck in the format, like tier 0 or not. I think that it is a defining deck of the format where, like, whenever you have a tournament, people will play this deck because it is a deck that can win tournaments, and it is a deck that can basically just kill the opponent without them being able to do anything about it, right? So, because of that, this thing is just nasty, and I don't think it will lead to Frog format getting much exploration. I mean, I'm not going to explore it too much on the channel. I'm just going to basically show off the Frog deck and then dive into the next format, which can sort of show off the other decks that would be legal here in a bit better detail. But I wanted to discuss this first because that is the deck that is going to be dominating. That's why a lot of the other decks, despite being able to do very strong things, will just not be able to compete against this because they're going to go first at least one match of the set, right? And, even if they don't go for Frog FTK, they can still play a regular Frog deck, which is also strong. So, yeah, this thing is busted. But it's not the only other card added to a previously existing archetype. Of course, the others are a bit less good. But, if I get to talk about Battery Man, I'll talk about it, even though Battery Man is not really a deck that can compete against frogs or some of the other powerful decks in the format. I did get Battery Man Fuel Cell, which is a very, very good piece of support for it. It's a level 6 Thunder, 2100 attack, 0 defense. It says if you control 2 or more face-up Battery Man monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand once per turn. You can treat 1 Battery Man monster, set this card, select 1 card your opponent controls, and return to the owner's hand. So the basic, strategy that you do, although you could use like Battery Man AAA, which also came out, which, basically when you normal summon or, is flip it face up, you get special summon a Battery Man AAA from your hand or graveyard. That gets 2 Battery Man on field, so you could go for Fuel Cell that way. But the basic combo is that you summon out Battery Man Charger to then special summon out another Battery Man. And then you've got 2 for Fuel Cell. And the Charger's getting a big boost in attack because it's got a bunch of Battery Man on field. And yeah, there's no Battery Man 9-volt at this point in the game's history, so you can't like bring out that as well. But, this is a good enough combo that if you are able to draw it, then, you can put up a pretty formidable board and deal with what your opponent has pretty nicely. But again, it does take some setup. It does take drawing like relatively well. And Froggift to be able to eat that alive, as well as some other decks in the format will also eat that sort of thing alive. Funnily enough, it's not the only Thunder archetype that sort of got support here. Watts also got onto the scene. Now, at this point in the game, it doesn't really have a coherent sort of strategy. Basically, the Watts all do like slightly different things. Watt Giraffe is a Thunder, 1200 attack, 100 defense, so this card can attack directly. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by direct attack, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects until the end of this turn, which, I'm not sure what cards or effects they'd really be activating after you're attacking in, right? Like if they had battle traps, they'd just probably use that on like Watt Giraffe maybe. If they don't, maybe end phase MST or Dust Tornado, but like I don't really, get the point of this thing, being here unless you want to use it to insulate like plays in main phase 2. But in this format, I don't really think that is good enough. We've got Watt Woodpecker as well, level 3 Thunder, 1000 attack, 100 defense. So this card can attack twice during each battle phase. Any monster that battles with this card cannot change its battle position. I don't really know why this card's here. Maybe if you're playing a deck that can switch your opponent's things to defense mode, then you bring this thing out, attack into 2 defense position monsters, and now they can't switch back to attack. But like your opponent can still use those cards for like synchro material, for tribute material, like this card is not good. You either want to be attacking over something your opponent has and getting rid of it, or, it's just not that good. This thing is just really, really bad. Watt Fox is the tuner of the deck so far, even though the deck has no synchros right now. Level 2 Thunder, 800 attack, 100 defense. If this card is destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or by card effect, your opponent cannot special summon a monster or activate spell traps or spell trap effects or monster effects for the rest of this turn. Again, this is kind of like Watt Giraffe, where if your opponent's actually doing an aggressive push, attacking in over your stuff, like they don't necessarily need to be activating too many like effects later on in the turn. You could argue that maybe this stops a main phase 2 synchro play. Like, let's say your opponent's like taking control of one of your monsters with like Brain Con, right? And then they're attacking in over your stuff and then want to synchro off, in main phase 2. Now they can't do that with Watt Fox, but that is a very niche scenario, and most of the time this thing is just going to be basically useless for its effect. It is a level 2 tuner, so you can use it for that, I guess, but like, realistically that doesn't really matter if the, deck you played in is not really going to be able to use it for anything. We've also got Watt Cube, which is an equip spell, which is a generic Thunder equip spell, so I could have put it in the sort of discussion of the type-specific support that was released as well, but it's got Watt in its name, so technically is a Watt card, so I figured I'd cover it here. So equip only to a Thunder-type monster, gain 100 attack for each Thunder-type monster in your graveyard. You can send this face-up card from the field of the graveyard to have 1 face-up Thunder-type monster control, gain 1000 attack. This is honestly better in a Battery Man deck because, the deck just has more monsters to fuel the grave, and also it can get its monsters bigger. But realistically, this thing is not good. I guess you could equip it to a Watt Giraffe, just to have a big Watt Giraffe or a big Watt Woodpecker or whatever. But the deck didn't necessarily need more attack, although that would be helpful because all of their monsters are very weak. The deck just needs good things to do, and right now it doesn't have that. So this thing doesn't really, help Watt-based strategy. And I think most Thunder strategies are in a similar spot where like they just don't do enough, and having a card that boosts attack is not going to help that. But speaking of lights, we also got a new Charmer. We got Lina the Light Charmer. If you're familiar with the Spirit Charmers, this is one of those just for lights. So it's a flip effect that lets you take control of 1 light monster opponent controls while this card face up on the field. So not rocket science, not the craziest thing in the world, but this thing's not really good. I don't think we'll see play in most decks, but it's kind of funny that they're continuing to add out for that archetype of monsters or series of monsters, depending on what you want to call it. Dark Lords also became a thing, in this set of releases. Again, kind of like Watts, they kind of do different things. Although I will say Superbia and Edit Array kind of go together. Superbia is a level 8 Dark Fairy, 29 attack, 24 in defense. It says, when this card spell summoned from the graveyard, you can target one fairy type monster in your graveyard, except for Dark Lord Superbia, spell summon that target. And Edit Array is a level 5 fairy, 23 in attack, 2000 defense. Says, if this card spell summoned from the graveyard, gains this effect, and then if this card attacks a defense monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. So, these two can kind of pair together, or you bring back Superbia through some means, and then bring back Edit Array as well. But honestly, Superbia has a good enough effect that you can just play it in a fairy deck and just bring back another fairy that has more impact. So as of this point, the Dark Lords don't really have enough synergy, or at least aren't worth playing together enough to actually make them worth it. Although Superbia could be played in a generic fairy deck. There's another Dark Lord. Dark Lord is Modius, a level 8 fairy. 3,000 attack, 2,500 defense, cannot be spell summoned from the deck or graveyard, so it's anti-synergy with Superbia. And then once per turn, you can send one fairy type monster from your deck to the graveyard. If this card you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can control some one Asmo token, which is an 1800 attack, 1300 defense, level 5 fairy. And one Deus token, which is a level 3 attack, 1200 defense, 1200 fairy token. And Asmo tokens cannot be destroyed by card effects. Deus tokens cannot be destroyed by battle. So I like the flavor of this card, where when it's destroyed, it splits into two pieces that add up to the whole. But realistically, they cannot be spell summoned from graveyard. It's kind of rough. You could spell summon out this thing from hand with something like Valhalla. But, there are better fairies that you can spell summon out with that card instead. So I don't really think it's that good. But it's a fun card to play. I don't know. Maybe if you want to build a deck around it, you can. But realistically, it doesn't do enough compared to some of the other fairy boss monsters you could be playing, like Christia. For the last sort of archetype that got new support here, we got Kokimeru, which is actually kind of interesting. I like that they're continuing to try and, make this deck work despite its big flaws. But, Prototype is a way to try and address one of the flaws, I think, even though it's not really a good way to do that. It's level 4 Earth, Rock, 1800 attack, 1800 defense. It says, if a face-up Kokimeru monster or monsters on the field will be destroyed during the end phase, you can destroy this card instead, so that mitigates its effect. Or not its effect, but the effect of Kokimeru is that they destroy themselves at the end phase unless you reveal a certain type of card from your hand or send an Iron Core Kokimeru to the graveyard. And this says, when a face-up Kokimeru monster or monsters on the field is destroyed during the end phase, you can special summon one Kokimeru token, which is an 1800 attack, 1800 defense, rock, earth, level 4 monster. So, you can either choose to destroy this if you value your Kokimeru monster enough, or you can just make a token. So you basically replace the monster that you lost. So I think it's an interesting sort of effect. But unfortunately, you don't want to be losing your Kokimeru monsters in the end phase anyways. And that applies for Prototype as well, right? Because if you summon this thing out to then substitute for a destruction effect in the end phase, then you've basically lost a normal summon to keeping another monster alive, right? Which is still not good, right? You either have to lose a card from hand if you discard an Iron Core, or you lose this thing on field. And that's if you don't have a card to reveal. Obviously, the way you want to play these Kokimeru monsters are in decks that actually have cards to reveal for them. The way you play these are not in a pure Kokimeru deck. But I find it interesting that they're trying to make a Kokimeru pure deck work with things like Prototype, even if this doesn't actually alleviate the deck's main issues. Next monster, Kokimeru Sandman. This is a level 4 rock, 1900 attack, 1200 defense. So during each of your end phase, destroy this card unless you send one Iron Core of Kokimeru from your hand to the graveyard, or reveal one rock monster in your hand. When your opponent activates a trap card, quick effect, you can contribute this card, negate the activation, and you destroy that card. So it's like Guardian and Wall, where it's another rock monster with 1900 attack that can negate a specific type of your opponent's cards. If you want to build that sort of rock style stun deck, you can do that. But that deck is much, much too slow in this format. We get Kokimeru Berserk as well, which is sort of warrior support. It's level 4, 2000 attack, warrior. So during each of your end phase, destroy this card unless you send one Iron Core of Kokimeru from your hand to the graveyard, or reveal one warrior type monster in your hand. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, can attack once again in the row. So it's basically a big warrior that you can bring out to just get aggressive pressure going. Unfortunately, generic warrior decks are not really at a premium in this format. And I think if you're playing a archetype-specific warrior deck, that deck kind of wants to play warriors in its archetype as opposed to playing Bergzak. But it's an interesting card. I liked this card a lot as a kid, even though now, I can recognize all its flaws. Kokimeru's also got some spell trap support. Core Overclock is the first one. Continuous spell that says all face-up Kokimeru monsters you control gain 500 attack. And then once per turn during your main phase, you can discard 1 Iron Core of Kokimeru to have all face-up Kokimeru monsters you control gain 1000 attack until the end phase. This boosts the attack of Kokimerus. Like with Wakube, that's not the flaw of the deck needed fixed, right? The attack boost is nice. And I can see with Bergzak, they're just trying to make like the deck go hyper aggressive with big monsters. But realistically, that's not what the deck needs. It will need quite more support before it becomes actually like playable in any capacity. Kokimeru Initialize is not that support though. It's a quick flip spell that says tribute 1 Kokimeru monster to add 1 Iron Core of Kokimeru from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So this is kind of like this deck's version of Gemspark in a way, where if your opponent tries to use removal on your Kokimeru monster, you can chain Kokimeru Initialize, tribute that monster, and then get some card advantage. But realistically, it doesn't even give you card advantage because it's just basically trading, 1 Kokimeru monster for your opponent's removal, right? And then replacing Initialize with an Iron Core, right? So it doesn't even, go plus on card advantage. It basically goes neutral, which it does thin out your deck and give you an Iron Core to use with the other Kokimeru cards, but that is not good enough in this deck. So I like this better than Core Overclock, but it's still not really that good overall. Last card is Kokimeru Shield, a normal trap that says activate only when your opponent's monster collects attack. If you have 2 or more Iron Core Kokimeru in your graveyard, destroy all face-up attack position monster your opponent controls. That is rough. Iron Core is already a brick. This forces you to play 2 or more of it, which maybe that's the ideal way for Kokimeru decks to play. But it's just having 2 in your graveyard as well, so that means that you can't use them for, it's just so bad. It's like really bad, especially when Mirror Force already exists in the format. This gives you more copies of Mirror Force, but like the hoops you have to jump through are just not worth it. Lastly, I want to talk about Scrap Archfiend, which was, I believe, a sneak peek card for the upcoming set Duelist Revolution. And this thing is just a generic level 7 tuner, or not tuner, synchro monster, 2200 attack, 1800 defense, that will eventually go into the Scrap Archfiend, which also comes out in Duelist Revolution. But according to Format Library, this is legal for the format, so I will go with what they say there. And just generic level 7 tuner if you want more of those. But yeah, that does it for these sort of archetype cards that don't really fit into the Hidden Arsenal or anime schemas. But let's dive into those Hidden Arsenal cards, because a lot of those came out. That's honestly one of the other big focuses of this format, because the other deck you can play outside of Frog FTK is X-Saber, which is one of those. Now, if you don't know what Hidden Arsenal is, it's basically a set of packs released around this time that are very archetype focused. The only cards in those sets are archetype based, and all the archetypes are loosely connected for lore reasons. And X-Sabers are one of those. And up to this point, they've been playable like an Edison format with things like, Rescue Cat into multiple Airbellum, to then go into Fall Troll, to then bring back other things, and you could make it work somewhat. It hadn't really found a, optimal build in Edison that actually gets it to like a tier 1 status, but it is a deck that people will play, and you do have to respect it to some degree. With the release of X-Saber Darksoul, the deck just becomes pretty busted, because Darksoul is sort of something that the deck needed, which was a good way to actually search out cards from the deck. And Darksoul, because of a certain ruling on the TCG side of things, enabled that better than a lot of other decks could. So Darksoul is a level 3 Earth Beast effect monster, 100 attack, 100 defense. So during the end phase, if this card is sent from your side of the field to the graveyard this turn, you can add 1 X-Saber monster from your deck to the hand. And an important thing to note, while that may seem like a pretty innocuous effect right now, this was ruled at the time to trigger for each time it was sent to graveyard. So basically what that means is, let's say you are doing an X-Saber combo. So you've got Darksoul out, you summon out like Airbellum, right? Summon out Fall Troll on top of that, synchro off into a Hyunlei or something with the Darksoul and Airbellum. So Darksoul's gone to grave 1 time. Then you bring back, Darksoul, maybe you have a way to get the Airbellum back, like God's E-Call or something, and then you sync off with it again into another 6, or maybe into a 9 if you use E-Call, like go into a X-Saber Gothams, right? And then it's in the graveyard again. Let's say you can then bring back out another Fall Troll or something, bring it back again, and then tribute it for the Gothams effect to then rip a card out of hand, right? So it's gone to graveyard 3 times over the course of this turn. In your end phase, you will be able to search out 3 X-Saber monsters from your deck to hand. That is absolutely busted, right? And X-Sabers can get into graveyard multiple times, like because it can combo off. It does have ways to tribute it for things like X-Saber Gotems, as I mentioned. Like, this thing is just absolutely broken. And even if you're just using it for the one search in the end phase, that one search is oftentimes what you need, right? To then get the card to hand that you will then use next turn to then pop off on the next turn. So even if it only searched like once, that would greatly help the deck. But because it can search multiple times, because of the way it was ruled at the time, this does make X-Sabers a big threat. And actually, the next format after Frog on Format Library is called X-Saber for that reason. The deck is very good. This deck actually got second place at SGC Indianapolis in 2010, which is the event that this format's based around. And so it is able to take some names in this format, even though Frog FTK is very scary, right? This is why I sort of brought up that Frog FTK might not be the best deck in this format, even though it is a meta-defining one. And X-Saber is one of the reasons why. They also got Bargain Knight, which is also a good card for the deck. It's a level 4 Beast Warrior, 1900 attack, 1000 defense. When this card normal summoning, you're supposed to summon one level 4 lower X-Saber monster from your hand. And it cannot be used as synchro material except for the synchro summon of an X-Saber synchro monster. So this thing is very good at enabling synchro plays. You can go Bargain Knight into like a Pashul, into Hyunlei to pop your opponent's back row. You can go Bargain Knight into a Fulton Knight, into an Urbellum if you want to do that instead. It opens up other options, but more importantly, it gets out enough X-Sabers for a Fall Troll. So you can just go Bargain Knight, special summon out maybe Darksoul, and then go for Fall Troll, and then you've got synchro plays out the wazoo. So this thing is very good for the deck, just provides a great way to extend, and also a bit of beefy guy, which can come up as well. The last X-Saber support card released was Saber Vault. This card is not as good as the other two, but frankly, it didn't need to be because the deck already had a lot of its pieces already in place by the time Edison format rolled around. So, it just really needed something like Darksoul and Bargain Knight to really catapult it a bit further. Saber Vault is a field spell that says each face-up X-Saber monster on the field gains 100 attack times its level and lose 100 defense times its level. So it's just an attack boost. Again, like with Walk Cube, like with anything that increases the attack of an archetype. Is this thing really necessary for the archetype? No. And X-Sabers don't really need that because they've got enough beefy guys already. So this thing is not really that good. But, the two support cards they got that were good, were enough for the deck. Now, another powerful thing that X-Sabers can do in this format compared to other decks, it can actually make some powerful Earth synchros that other decks can't necessarily make. Naturia Beast is the big one. This is a level 5 Beast Synchro made with an Earth Tuner and one or more non-tuner Earth monsters. And this, unlike Goyo, is not an errata. This does indeed need Earth Tuners. And X-Sabers does have some Earth Tuners, so they can actually make this deck if they need to. But this is a very powerful synchro monster. Says when a spell card is activated, quick effect, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, negate the activation if you destroy it. This card must be face up on the field to activate and resolve this effect. Now, as a note, that's not once per turn, not even once per chain. So, if your opponent's activating spell cards, you can just basically shut that down by milling the top of your deck, which most decks do not mind. X-Sabers doesn't even mind doing that because it gets more X-Sabers engraved for things like Gotems, E-Call that is, and for things like Voltro, right? So, Nat Beast, if you can make it, very, very good. And the deck can make it. Pashul plus Darksoul makes Nat Beast on its own. And so, yeah, this card's very good if you go into it. Naturia also has another synchro monster, Naturia Leo Drake, which also needs an Earth Tuner and one or more non-Earth Tuner monsters. This is a level 9 synchro that's just a 3,000 body beater. Not really as good as Beast, especially because X-Sabers kind of do have a bit of a tight extra deck. So I don't know if they necessarily slot in a Leo Drake here, but Beast is definitely one to consider. And both these new cards are part of a new hidden arsenal archetype called the Naturia monsters. And Naturia is, based on Beast, you can probably guess what they kind of do. They like to sort of punish your opponent from doing plays, right? So that could, mean negating in the case of Beast, or it could mean just getting some advantage when your opponent activates an effect or summons something out, right? So Vayne is the card that's closest to Beast, I'd say. And this initial wave of support is a level 1 Earth Plant Tuner monster, 200 attack, 300 defense. Says when your opponent activates a spell or trap card, quick effect, you can tribute 1 Naturia monster in this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Now, if you're looking at this card and comparing to Beast, you might see a problem, that is manifested in Naturias where that's not a good effect, right? That's the archetype main deck wise does not have good monsters. Which is a shame because I really like the sort of flavor of this where they're all nature themed and they, kind cut your opponent off from doing things. Like, I like that style of deck, even though it might be a bit too toxic if these decks were actually a lot better. But the reason why Vayne is so bad is if you have it out and also you have, like, let's say level 4, you could just go into a beast and probably be in a better spot than if you had Vayne out and had to tribute 2 of your cards, right? Yeah, and also, like, you know, I guess the benefit here is that it's spell or traps, so, like, you know, it's can cover more bases than Beast, I guess, but it's also very, very weak in terms of attack and defense. So if your opponent wants to activate, like, a spell card, right, they'll just summon out a thing, attack over Vayne, and then activate that spell card, right? And you've lost the chance to really do anything about that. So yeah, Vayne is not really that good. And neither are the rest of the Centurion monsters. I'd say that Rose Whip is probably the next best. It's another tuner, level 3 plant, 4 in attack, 70 in defense. Says your opponent can only activate 1 spell trap card each turn. So this can sort of contribute to a lockdown effect, right? Where Vayne negates an effect. This basically restricts what your opponent can do. And, you know, that can be used in conjunction with other things. Like, if you negate that effect, then that is very good, right? But it can also be used in conjunction with things like Ensure Beetle, which is a level 4 insect. It's each time a spell card activates, switch the original attack and defense of this card. So let's say you've got the attack of this thing at 400, defense at 1800. If your opponent's restricted only 1 spell effect activation, if they want to activate that before the battle phase, then Beetle can switch to 1800 attack and be a bit more difficult to get over. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of reaching to make Beetle, you know, fit into this general strategy in a meaningful way, but Beetle's just really, really bad. But again, it contributes to sort of the, oh, your opponent does something, you get to do something, right? And Rock is another one of those. It's a rock monster, no duh. Total attack, total defense, does 1 for chain. When a trap card is activated, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard and spell summon this card from your hand. And this sort of fits in with some of the other Ensure cards, being able to spell summon themselves out when your opponent does something. So Rock is when your opponent activates a trap card. Cosmo Beat is when your opponent normal summons a shadow monster. You can spell summon this thing out from hand. Andraw says when your opponent spell summons a monster, you can spell summon 1 level 3 or lower Ensure monster from your deck. So that is arguably a little bit better. Let's say you have Andraw out and your opponent spell summons a monster, you potentially spell summon like Vayne from deck to then represent a negation, right? Unfortunately, you know, Antjaw, Cosmo Beat, and Rock all have the unfortunate distinction of having very, very low attack and defense stats. So, you know, if you bring out Rock or Cosmo Beat, your opponent just beat over that. And so at this point, it's basically worse Battle Fader. And with Antjaw, like, if your opponent sees it on field, they don't have to necessarily special summon before just beating over this thing. And then special summoning in main phase too, right? So you could argue that that does protect yourself against what they're doing. But also your opponent might not really care about what Antjaw brings out, because again, the Ensure monsters are not that good, right? So even if you bring out like a Vayne, like representing a negation, right? That's not even that good. I mean, it's fine, but like your opponent just spell summon, see you brought out Vayne, and then be like, okay, I'm not going to activate spell and trap because we're going to go to battle, run over your stuff, right? So Antjaw, not good at this point in the game. You know, it just needs more Ensure monsters out to actually do something potentially. Guardian is a bit better in terms of the attack and defense department. Level 4 plant, 600 attack, 4 in defense. If your opponent normal summons a monster, this card gains 300 attack until the end of the turn. Unless your opponent's using double summon, that will basically only buff this thing up to 1900, which is better than the other Ensure monsters, but also not really good enough, right? We've also got Notorious Spiderfang here, which is the beefiest of the Ensure monsters at 2100 attack, 4 in defense. But this card cannot declare an attack unless your opponent activates a card or effect this turn. So that's a pretty big restriction. If your opponent is, you know, they have battle traps or something, they don't even need to use them because Spiderfang cannot attack, right? And none of the other Ensure monsters you really want to use a battle trap on, except for maybe Beast, right? But if you got Beast out, like that's your best thing that you could have, right? So I guess if you've got Beast Spiderfang, you attack them with Beast, they go like, you know, Dimensional Prison, right? Then you can get in for Spiderfang, and oh, you got in for 2100 attack. But they're just better beaters you could play. And honestly, the Ensure is just very, very disappointing on this initial wave of release. But I do like that they're trying things with more Earth monsters. You know, the X-Sabers were Earth, the Ensures are Earth, and this sort of is a thing that these Hidden Arsenal sets do, where they try to lean into archetypes, right? Or not archetypes, but attributes. Attributes and archetypes, right? They make new archetypes in given attributes. And that is something that the Gen X cards, focus on quite a bit, because these Gen X cards are not all of one attribute, but they use different attributes to go into their different synchro monsters, which are the big things. Now, Gen X monsters are not new to this format. There are some in Edison as well. And notably, their main monster that they do stuff with, Gen X Controller, is also in Edison. That's just a level 3 vanilla tuner that they, sort of focus on for a lot of their things. But it did get some new synchros in this format, and it did get some new tools as well. So let's talk about them. Firstly, we've got Geogenics for the Earth Genix here. Hydrogenics released before, that's the water synchro, but this is the Earth synchro. Level 6 machine synchro, 1800 attack, 20 defense. And it says it's made with Genix controller, one or more non-Earth tuner monsters, or non-tuner Earth monsters. And then once per turn, if you control a face-up level 4 lower Genix monster or monsters, you can switch the original attack defense of this card until the end phase for as long as you control a face-up level 4 or lower Genix monster. That is awful. That's really, really bad. I'm not saying the other Genix synchro monsters were better than this, but like that is just garbage. You make that with Genix Gaia and a Genix controller. It's a level 3 Earth Rock. 1000 attack, 900 defense. If this card on the field be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can destroy one Genix controller you control instead. And I must ask the question, if you have this thing out and Genix controller, why are you leaving them out and not just going into your Geogenics, right? Even if you leave this thing in defense, it's better than, just having Gaia and your controller out doing nothing, right? So yeah, this thing is not really that good. We also have Thermal Genix. This is a level 8 fire machine synchro, 24 attack, 1200 defense. Made with Genix controller, one or more non-tuner fire monster, which will be Genix Furnax, which we'll get into in a second. But this card gains 200 attack for each fire monster in your graveyard. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each Genix monster in your graveyard. Now, I don't know if they're purposely trying to make these things bad or not, but this thing is just awful from a card design perspective. Genix monsters are specifically of different attributes, so you can go into the different synchro monsters, right? So you're not going to have a ton of fire monsters in your graveyard unless you're just splashing a Genix controller in a fire deck, right? So that first part of the effect won't really come up all too often. The second part of the effect will only come up if you're playing a pure Genix deck, right? And if you're playing a pure Genix deck, again, you're not going to get the first effect. So like you have to choose which effect you actually use for this thing, and the effects are not really that good. If you want a level 8 monster that you can go into with a big attack stat, you go into Colossal Fighter, right? If you want a level 8 monster that inflicts damage to your opponent, and I guess there aren't really many of those out right now, but like, is that burn damage good enough on a 24 attack point monster? Like, I don't necessarily know. So yeah, this thing is not really that good, but you make it with Furnace, level 5 fire. It's a Pyro, 2000 attack, 1300 defense. It says if you control a face-up Genix controller, you can normal summon this card without attributing. So the idea is you have a controller out, summon out Furnace, go into a Thermal GX, and then Bob's your uncle. There you go. We've also got Windmill Genix. This is a level 7 wind machine synchro, 2000 attack, 1600 defense, made with controller and one or more non-tuner wind monster. This card gains 300 attack for each spell and trap card set on the field. You can send one card from your hand to the graveyard to select and destroy one set spell or trap card. Seems decent on paper. Seems like one of the better Genix monsters on paper, until you realize that that like this thing is, again, anti-synergistic, right? Like if you want to actually buff of his attack, you need to leave set spell or trap cards on field, and the value part of the effect with destroying set spell or trap cards, like it just actively works against itself. I guess that's the theme of these Genix monsters, that they just work against themselves constantly. And it's just unfortunate. But yeah, if you want a level 7 to destroy set spell and traps, you can go like Black Rose. That's probably better. And if you want one to gain attack, like you just go into a beefier level 7, like Strap Archfiend, which I mentioned. So yeah, this thing is just not good. Or it's not good. It's not good, because that would be a double negative making it good. But you make it with Genix Blackspan and Genix Controller, level 4 Spellcaster, 600 attack, 1300 defense. Says when this card is special summoned, you can add one Dark Genix monster from your deck to your hand. So the idea is you special summon this thing out, you get a Genix Controller, and then you can bring out that next turn to make your Windmill Genix. But it's really bad. I will say, if we're on the topic of, Dark Gen X monsters, there are actually a couple of them that try and pair with controller in other ways, which is kind of interesting. We get Gen X Doctor, the spellcaster, 1500 attack, 1000 defense. So you contribute one face of Gen X controller, select and destroy one card on the field. And if you don't have this specific controller, you can also make use of Spare and Recycled, which can both become Gen X controller. Gen X Spare is a Dark Machine tuner, level 3. So it can basically function for controller if you want to do a Synchro Summon as well. It says once per turn, if you control another Gen X monster, you can make this card's name Gen X controller until the end phase. So this really is Spare for controller. Although I doubt you're playing, more than one controller in your deck, maybe 2. Do you need Spare? I don't think so. But, if you want to do it, I guess you can. Recycled here is similar to level 1 Dark Machine Tutor. 200 attack, 400 defense. One per turn, you select one Gen X monster in your graveyard until the end phase of this card's name is treated as selected monster's name. So, if you got controller in your graveyard, you can turn this into a controller, although it messes with the level math for your Gen X monsters. So, having this be level 1 is just not worth it. The only reason why you do this, I guess, is for Gen X Doctor, right? You've done a Gen X Synchro play, you've got Doctor out, you summon out Recycled, treat this name as controller, and then you tribute that for the Doctor to pop something. That would be the only combo I'd really see with this. Other than that, it's just really, really bad. Now, the best Gen X monsters released in this set actually does see play outside of Gen X later on in the game's history. That's Gen X Neutron. Level 4 Light Machine, 1800 attack, 1 defensive, once per turn. During the end phase of this card, normal summon this turn, you can add one machine type tuner monster from your deck to your hand. And the reason why this thing sees play outside of Gen X is because it's not Gen X specific, right? It is a Gen X monster, but it can be played in any machine deck that uses tuners. So this thing is very good for those decks. It's also good in Gen X because you can search out the controller, right? But you can't really go into a synchro play with it because it's a light, and none of the Gen X synchro monsters out right now are light based. So yeah, this thing is just not really good in Gen X. There aren't really any machine decks that really want to play it at this point in the game's history, but later on there will be some, so it's important to note now. Moving on, we've also got Gen X Turbine, another Earth Gen X that can't go into your Geo Gen X. Even if you try and use Recycled, it doesn't add up to the level, so that's kind of unfortunate, but it is a level 4 Earth. 14 attack, 13 defense, said all face-up Gen X monsters you control gain 400 attack, which, again, I don't know if you're seeing all the anti-synergies here or not, but this thing is anti-synergistic with what Gen X cards want to do, where, there's some cards that want to synchro into your stuff, so you're reducing the number of Gen X monsters on your field. There's some cards that want to tribute your stuff, like Doctor. So it's there's just so many things that, are anti-synergistic with this deck, where this one wants you to have a ton of Gen X monsters on your field to boost them all up, but it's just by 400. So it's I don't know. It's just not good. It's basically an 1800 beater most of the time. Army is a level 6 Earth Machine, 23 attack, 13 defense. Says when this card tribute summoned by tributing a Gen X monster, you can destroy one card your opponent controls. So, again, a card that is removing a Gen X from your field, summoning it out, popping an opponent's thing. It's kind of like Doctor in that way, although Doctor is reusable. Army is probably a little bit better because it doesn't have to be a controller. It can be any Gen X monster, but still not really that good overall. You just play a Monarch instead. We've also got Gen X Solar, which is a level 7 Light Machine. It said you can normal summon this card by triggering one Gen X monster and inflict 500 damage to your opponent each time a face-up Gen X monster you control is sent to the graveyard. So this is another Gen X boss monster. They're kind of just throwing boss monsters at a wall at this point, right? Because they're like, okay, well, what if you don't want to play it the synchro way? We've got a 2 tribute Gen X monster that you can bring out for 1 tribute if you tribute Gen X monster, and then you can just turn into a burn strategy, right? The deck is just all over the place, and this applies to a fair amount of Hidden Arsenal archetypes, but it's just really they're throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks, but because they're throwing so many things at the wall, nothing is sticking, and it's kind of unfortunate because Gen X, it's neat in theory. If they'd actually managed to make this deck work, it could have been a really interesting style of deck, but unfortunately they're just not giving it the power that it needs. But Gen X are not the only focus on attribute in this set. We've also got Ally of Justice cards, which focus on attribute as well. Now, there are Ally of Justice cards in Edison format. Ally of Justice Catastrophe is the big one. And these Ally of Justice cards will sort of fall into a similar pattern where, the main deck monsters are all pretty bad. They have a new synchro monster that is also pretty bad, but, it can come up, I guess. So it's a thing you could play that actually has some utility potentially. But the rest of the Ally of Justice cards here are, just god-awful. But the focus of Ally of Justice cards are to basically punish your opponent for playing light monsters. And that's what these do. Ally of Justice Core Destroyer is basically a mini Catastrophist, but it only affects light monsters. So at the start of the damage step, if this card battles light monster, destroy that monster. So basically use the most of the utility that Catastrophist has. But if your opponent playing a light deck, this thing, I guess, could come up. Ally of Justice Cosmic Gateway is a level 8 machine, 24 attack, 12 defense, and it says if your opponent controls 2 or more monsters, including a light monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. So you just get a big guy for free. That's kind of nice. But unfortunately, it doesn't actually go into the Ally of Justice Field Marshal that you'd want it to, because Field Marshal is a level 9, yes, but it requires 1 tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters. So if you were hoping to do a cool play where like you special summon out Cosmic Gateway, summon a level 1 tuner, and go into Field Marshal, you can't really do that. And speaking of Field Marshal, I might as well just cover it now. 29 attack, 2600 defense. Maybe 1 tuner, 2 or more non-tuner monsters must be synchro summoned. If this attacking card destroys a face-down monster by balance in the graveyard, draw 1 card. And that may seem weird because it's not focused on punishing light decks. And you'll find that a fair amount of the Ally of Justice cards in this set are more focused on switching to punishing set monsters as opposed to light monsters. So why did they make that pivot? I don't know. But on the light train, we've got Ally of Justice Nullifier, level 4, Dark Machine, 600 attack, 12 defense. So if this card battles light monster after damage calc, negate the effects of that monster, including the graveyard. So again, anti-light. Ally of Justice Reverse Break isn't actually really anti-light. It just has a major downside if your opponent has a light monster, or if you have a light monster for that matter. But if you're playing Ally of Justice, you probably don't. This is a machine, 1200 attack, 1200 defense. If a light monster is on the field, destroy this card at the start of the damage step. If this card attacks face down monster, destroy that face down monster. So it's basically Sasuke Samurai, but slightly beefier. Is it worth playing? I would say probably not, but it sort of brings us to this theme of defense position punishes, right? Ally of Justice Searcher, another one, level 3, Dark Machine, 1400 attack, 100 defense, said once per turn you can discard 1 card, then target 1 face down defense position monster your opponent controls, change that target face up attack position. Full effect monsters are not activated at this time. So there's a way to basically, get those in attack and attack over them, although it does kind of conflict with something, like a Reverse Break, which wants to attack over set monsters. This gives you just a different way to deal with set monsters. Ally of Justice Enemy Catcher, level 6, machine, 1800 attack, 1800 defense. Says when this card normal summoned, you can target 1 face down monster your opponent controls. Take control of that target until the end phase. So again, punishing the sets. Why? I don't know. But apparently that's what Ally of Justice does now. They punish lights and they punish sets. You'd think that's sort of an anti-lore synergy, because light and set, just feel like different things, but it is what it is, I guess. I just Thunder Armor, level 8 machine, 27 attack, 22 defense. Is sort of like another boss monster for the deck, can't be special summoned, which basically removes all viability it might have had. And so if your ally just monster attacks monster, inflict piercing damage to your opponent. So again, anti-synergy with the Reverse Break, which destroys at the start of the damage step. Reverse synergy with Ally of Justice Searcher, which prevents them from being in defense position at all. Enemy Catcher prevents them from having a defense monster on the field. So it's just like all these cards are anti-defense, but they all sort of anti-synergize with each other in weird ways. It's just, I don't know what they were doing when they designed these cards. Ally of Justice Illuminator is sort of doing its own thing here as well. It's a level 2 machine. With 600 attack, 200 defense. So you can tribute this card and then target 1 ally of Justice monster you control. That target attack becomes double its real attack until the end of this turn. So that allows for bigger damage pushes, I guess. But it's just, is that what the deck needed? No. Did it fit in with the, flavor of the deck at all? No. Like, I don't know what they're doing with Ally of Justice cards. I don't think Konami did either. We've also got Ally Mind as a, sort of normal monster that provides flavor to the deck. It's a level 5 machine tuner. 1800 attack, 1400 defense. It's a high performance unit developed to enhance the artificial intelligence program in Ally of Justice, loaded with elements collected from Meteor from the Worm Nebula, which we'll get to later on in this section. It allows for high tuning performance, but its true capacity is not yet uncovered. Well, I mean, I'll say the artificial intelligence for this thing is not really that smart if it's, sort of pumping out these Ally of Justice monsters here. Not very good. Moving back onto non-standard dark or light attribute cards, we've got Flamvels. Flamvels are a fire-based archetype that did receive some cards in previous sets, so there are Flamvel cards in Edison format. Big one being Rekindling, which isn't specific to Flamvel, but Flamvel does use a lot of. And if you've seen the card art for Flamvel, or for Rekindling, then you'll see a similarity here because Flammable Babies are on the artwork. So now we finally get this monster as well. What does it do? It's a Pyro Tuner, 800 attack, 200 defense. So you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one fire monster control. That target gains 400 attack. Is that really that good? No, but like it's a tuner with 200 defense. So you got that. I mean, that's nice. Yeah, it's basically Collude at home. But, you know, Flamvells are not really good enough to need a Collude at home. You know, they need other things to hopefully make them better. Flammable Grunica is a level 4 fire dragon, 1700 attack, 200 defense. So if this card destroys a monster by balance into the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original level of the destroyed monster times 200. So this is another way to burn. Not terrible, 200 defense, so you can bring back off rekindling. But again, is not good enough for what the deck needs. Again, Flammable is another deck that sort of struggles from like, what is it really doing here, right? And Rekindling and Flammable Fire Dog gives it like sort of a way in where it's like, okay, we're just going to be the Rekindling spam deck. We're going to bring out Flammevells from deck with like Fire Dog, right? But like Grunica is just bring the deck in a different direction. And it's like, there are too many different directions. You're going in all over the place and it doesn't lead to a viable deck. And that applies to pretty much all the decks in this set, with the exception of one. I'll say that, or I guess two, or I guess the one I'll cover at the end of this section. I'll sort of have a more unified theme. But Jirak is not going that direction. There's another fire strategy. It is based around dinosaurs, which are cool, but it's not really that good. We got Velo here, a level 4 fire dinosaur, 700 attack, 1000 defense. So when this attack card you control is destroyed by balance to the graveyard, you can special summon one Jirak monster for 17 or less attack from your deck. That can be another Velo if you want to. It can also be something like Monoloth if you want a tuner out here. Level 3 fire, 1500 attack, 12 defense. So this card can attack all monsters your opponent control once each. So this does a different thing than Velo does. But, you know, maybe Velo is the consistency card. Maybe other cards go along with Monoloth here and similar things. Protop's is another thing you can bring off Velo. It's a level 4 fire, 300 attack, 1200 defense, gains 100 attack for each monster your opponent controls. Okay, it's just gaining attack. Maybe the point of the deck is just having big guys to run over your opponent's stuff. Maybe. Tyrannus cannot be brought out off of Velo, but is a boss monster for the deck. Level 8 fire dinosaur, 2500 attack, 1400 defense. You can treat one dinosaur monster. This card gains 500 attack. This card destroys opponent's monster by balance into the graveyard. This card gains 300 attack. Okay, so this is another attack booster. So maybe the deck is just about boosting attack of its monsters. Okay, I could see that. I could get behind that. Giganoto also, you know, boost the attack of your Jirax. This is the synchro for the deck. Level 7 made with one tuner and one or more non-tuner dinosaur monster, 200 attack. So Jirak monster control gain 200 attack for each Jirak monster in your graveyard. So okay, I'm starting to see the vision. Maybe you cycle through some Velos, go into a Monoloth or Protops, then you know summon out the other to go into a Giganoto. And then, you know, that has big attack. Maybe you set up a Tyrannus at some point to then also have even bigger attack and just big guys coming out. Okay, I can kind of get that. But if the strategy of this deck is just big guys, like, there are other decks that do that natively by just having big guys naturally, right? And so this deck does not really do enough to, you know, be a good enough cohesive unit to be viable, in my opinion. But, you know, this is sort of an island of semi-coherence before we get into Ice Barrier cards, which is throw all that out the window. And they always have, right? Ice Barrier cards have been in Edison format as well. I mean, Bryanak is limited in that format because it's very, very good. But unfortunately, the rest of the Ice Barriers are not really that good. And they don't really have a unifying thing to bring them together. You know, I will say some of them are better in this, you know, set than before. Like Medium is actually kind of neat. It's level 7 water. Spellcaster, 22 attack, 1600 defense. If your opponent controls 4 more cards than you do, you can spell summon this card from your hand. And your opponent can only activate one spell trap each turn. Now, this thing is actually good enough to be potentially a boss monster on its own. And it's actually not that hard to set up because if you are, you know, not committing too much to board, then your opponent will likely accrue 4 or more cards. And then you just bring this thing out from hand, bam, and restrict your opponent to activating only one spell trap a turn. 22 attack is not too bad for something like this. So I think this card's actually decent. But again, it sort of doesn't really go along with the other Ice Barrier cards. Although it spell summons itself out from hand. The spell card Magic Triangle, the Ice Barrier, also spell summons from hand, so that's kind of nice. This spell just says reveal 3 Ice Barrier monsters with different names in your hand, then target one card your opponent controls. Destroy that target, and if you do, spell summon 1 Ice Barrier monster from your hand, so that is actually really good. pops a card, special summons out a monster. So I would say this thing is decent. And you can even bring out other big things like Daisojo of the Ice Barrier, level 6, with 1600 attack, 20 defense. Now, if it's normal flip summon, just change defense position, but if it's brought out off of Magic Triangle, then you can just leave it in attack. And Ice Barrier monster you control cannot be destroyed by spell trap effects. So that is pretty good. So I would say that like these 3 cards are pretty decent. After that, the Ice Barrier monsters released kind of go downhill. But these 3, like, they're giving them something. They're giving them some ways to be like, okay, like maybe you can do something here. But Pilgrim and Geomancer are not really that good. Pilgrim is level 4 warrior, 1500 attack, 1000 defense, cannot be destroyed by battle with monster than 1900 or more attack. Okay, maybe they're focused on like protection with Daisojo and Pilgrim. I don't know. Geomancer is level 3 tuner. And it says once while face up on the field, you can discard 1 card and declare 1 attribute. Monster with that declared attribute cannot target this card for attacks. So again, going along with the attribute theming of this set, also protecting itself kind of like Pilgrim. So maybe there's a theme of like protection among these new Ice Barrier cards. But like, it's just, they are still kind of all over the place in how they protect themselves. And so that's kind of rough. Now there is a new Ice Barrier Synchro, and not as good as Bryo, but this thing is good enough to eventually get banned. But it's a level 6, so it has to compete with Bryo if you're like going for Synchro. And also it needs a non-tuner water monster to make. So it's less sort of flexible than something like Bryo. But this is a 2000 attack, 1400 defense point monster, Dulorn. And you can target any number of face-up cards you control, return those targets to hand, then this card gains 500 attack for each card returned to the hand by this effect until the end of the turn. You can only use the effect of Dulorn, Tiger of the Ice Barrier, once per turn. So this will eventually see play like, you know, doing nasty combo looping with things like Symbol of Heritage and other quick spells like that. But at this point, I don't really think this thing can do much in this format. Maybe it's something that Frog decks would maybe be able to play. I don't know. They play like Fishborg Blaster. So maybe you can do this thing to do certain combo stuff. I don't really know. But yeah, this thing is just generally not that good, in my opinion. But it's another tool that you can play if you want to play Ice Barrier Pure as well, I guess. Even though I would not recommend playing that style of deck. But speaking of returning things to hand, we've got our next archetype, which is the Mist Valleys, and these are all wind monsters. So they got a new boss monster, Apex Avian, a level 7 wind. That's really, really good. 27 attack on defense, 1 per chain, 1 a card, or effect is activated. Quick effect, you can target 1 Mist Valley card you control, return that target to the hand, and if you do, negate the activation, and if you do that, destroy it. So this is a negate, and it's once per chain. You just need enough Mist Valley cards to actually support it, but that's pretty good. That is better than the deck had up until this point, and makes the deck something that you could potentially play in some capacity, right? You know, they also got Executor, which is another boss monster, a bit less good than Apex Avian, but still something. Level 5 wind, and you know, 2100 attack, 1600 defense. So if this card normal summoned, return all face-up spell traps from the field to the hand. So this is basically Giant Tornado on legs. Is it the best thing in the world? No. I'd say it's probably the worst of the new Mist Valley cards that came out here, but it's another boss monster that you could potentially play. We also get Mist Valley Falcon. This is the basis of actually some decks just built around it called Falcon Punch, where you can like recycle things like Call the Haunted, like Limit Reverse, things like that, and just keep getting value off that. One of the coolest decks of this time period. Unfortunately, not really good enough to compete against things like Frogs at this time, but it's still fun. It is a level 4, 2000 attack, 1200 defense point, a winged beast. It says cannot declare an attack unless you return 1 card you control to the hand. So this might be a downside, but again, you can use it to loop things like Call the Haunted, that maybe you've tributed over the monster the call was there, or maybe you synchro summoned off with it. You know, it can be used to loop things to great value. So very fun card. Lastly, for the Mist Valley main deck monster, we get Mist Valley Baby Rock, level 2, Wind, Winged Beast Tuner, 4 attack, 600 defenses. When this card is sent from the hand of the graveyard, you can spell summon it, which is very similar to the next archetype that we'll be discussing here, but I think this card is pretty decent if you need to pitch something from hand. You can then go into Synchro play, potentially into a new Synchro monster like Mist Valley Thunderlord, level 7 Wind. Thunder Synchro, 2600 attack, 2400 defense, and made with 1 tuner or 1 or more non-tuner Mist Valley monsters. And once per turn, quick effect, you can target 1 other card you control, return that target to the hand, and if you do, this card gains 500 attack until the end of this turn. So this is actually a really neat way to dodge certain types of removal, which is kind of cool, and boost this thing up to, you know, 3100 attack, which is nothing to scoff at. So I like this thing a fair bit. I think that, you know, they're really trying to make the Mist Valley stuff work. Unfortunately, I don't think it has like enough of a density of monsters to really make it like the craziest thing in the world, but it is kind of fun here. And so if you want to tinker with it, you can. Unfortunately, I think it's probably best saved for the next format after Frog, because again, Frog FTK kind of defines a lot of the meta here. And a deck like this is probably going to play it a little bit slower, so it can't really keep up compared to the other decks in the format. But going back to the sending from hand to the graveyard and special summoning, we got Fabled, which is a fun little archetype here that's sort of also based around sending things from hand to grave and doing stuff when that happens. Fabled Grimro is the searcher for the deck. It's a light level 4 fiend, 700 attack, 1000 defense. If you control a Fabled monster, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, add one Fabled monster from your deck to your hand, except for Fabled Grimro. So this is a way to basically just cycle for another Fabled monster, which is kind of cool. And given that the other Fabled monsters have effects upon being pitched as well, you could then potentially even use the effect to then, or not this effect, but another effect to then pitch whatever you searched out and then get that effect off. Lurie is the one that a lot of people probably know because this thing has actually seen play in Modern recently. Level 1 Light Fiend, 200 attack, 400 defense. It says if this card is discarded, the graveyard special summon it. So this is an extension. So that's pretty good. We've also got Fabled Galabas, level 4, that can actually discard your stuff. So this is a Fiend, 1500 attack, 800 defense. So you can discard one card to the graveyard, then target one monster your opponent controls with defense less than or equal to this card's attack, destroy that target. So if your opponent has a monster like that, this can destroy it, then also either get like, a Lurie to come back to then extend further, or do something like that. I don't know, it's kind of a neat thing. And we've also got Kushano here as the tuner of the deck, because the deck does a synchro. And this card will see play in formats like Tengu Plant and some cool decks there. There's a level 3 Light Fiend Tuner, 1100 attack, 800 defense. So if this card's in your graveyard, you can discard one Fabled monster to the graveyard except for Fabled Kushano, and then add this card to your hand. So you could potentially do something like, pitch your Lurie, bring this thing back to your hand, bring out the Lurie, and then summon out the Kushano and sync off into something. Like, there's some interesting things that the deck can do. It obviously does not have enough here just yet to actually, be something on its own. But with further support, it could definitely, be a pretty interesting combo deck. It does have a synchro monster, though. The Fabled Valkyrus here is a level 8 Light Fiend, made with one Fabled Tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters, 29 attack, 17 defense. So once per turn, you can discard one Fiend monster, then draw one card. And again, this is sort of a way to trigger your Fabled Lurie, set up your Fabled Kushano, and draw deeper in your deck as well. So this thing is very, very good for the deck, and will just become better as new Fabled Spore cards come out. The last archetype here supported by Hidden Arsenal did not have a synchro monster to its name, but did actually receive some new bosses, and that is Worm. Now, the Worm cards, I think that is really cool. They go in alphabetical order. So up until this point, we've had A through K in terms of worms coming out, and now we have L through R coming out. So they're filling out the rest of the alphabet, which is kind of cool. But the worms are a flip-focused strategy, so most of them are flip effect monsters or pertain to flip effect monsters. And unfortunately, that makes them a bit too slow for a format like this, but they are kind of fun, so let's just talk about them. Worm Lynx is a flip 300 attack, 1000 defense point monster, and then during each end phase, if this card is face up, draw one card. So this is kind of like Desolacuda in a way, where you flip it up and then manage to protect it. You just keep drawing cards, which is kind of cool. But you does have to remain face up after getting flipped, and that can be a bit of a tall order. We got Worm Militith here, a level 4 light reptile, 400 attack, 600 defense. It says, flip, you can equip this card to a monster opponent controls an equip card, inflict 400 damage to the controller of the equipped monster during each standby phase. So, it's going a bit of a burn direction, which the deck doesn't generally do, which again, we're getting into another archetype where they're just throwing things at a wall and hoping that they stick. But because the archetype is all, focused on flip monsters, it actually does have more synergy, surprisingly, than something like Ice Barrier or something like Ally of Justice. Because, if you can play things to protect your monster getting flipped up and things like that, you can pick or choose which worms you actually want to play in the flip deck and use them for that. Before we get into the bosses, let's also talk about Opera. I know I'm skipping around in terms of the letters here, but I think it's important to talk about the little guys first. This is a flip monster. This all face-up monsters on the field lose 500 attack except for reptile-type worm monsters. So it's a way to devalue your opponent's monsters and increase the value of your own monsters. But because your worms are generally pretty weak, it won't actually help that much, in my opinion. Next up, we got Worm Rakuya, level 4 reptile, 1200 attack, 1200 defense. So this card can only declare an attack the turn it was flipped face up. If this card attacks, it's changed face down to at the end of the battle phase. So that's kind of cool. Unfortunately, your opponent has many ways to, sort of disrupt this plan. Like if they just attack into it, let's say it survives and doesn't die, then it can't attack, and then it can't be switched down into face down defense through its own effect. So it's like kind of rough in that way. As this could kind of be a pseudo boss monster, but I just think it's a neat card. And it's not a flip monster per se, but it tries to simulate flip monsters. And I think that's kind of cool. But getting into these sort of quote unquote bosses, and I'm just counting bosses as a monster that you have to tribute out to bring out. We got Worm Noble, is a level 6 flip. 1500 attack, 24 defense. So if this card flip face up by an opponent's monster attack, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the attacking monster attack. Not a very good boss, but it sort of falls in with Mildeth, where it's trying to burn here. The big bosses are Prince and Queen. Prince is a level 6, reptile 200 attack, 400 defense. So if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can add one reptile type worm monster from your deck to your hand during this card, or destroy this card during the end phase if you do not control another reptile type worm monster. So this is your searcher for the deck, and that's pretty powerful. I'd say the Queen is a little bit better, but it is still a decent boss monster here, getting those searches constantly and potentially setting up your later plays. Queen, though, is really good. It's level 8 light, 27 attack, 1100 defense. You can tribute this card in face-up attack by tributing one reptile type worm monster. Then once per turn, you can tribute one reptile type worm monster, spell summon one reptile type worm monster from your deck with a level less than or equal to the tributed monster. So this is just better than Prince in almost every way because you just bring it straight out to field. Now that being said, you spell summon it, so it's not going to be set. But if you have a way to set it down, that can be pretty nice. And you're just bringing out more cards. You can also potentially, well, I don't actually know how you can bring out Prince. I guess you could tribute Owen Noble and then bring out Prince that way. So that's something. But yeah, it's just a way to sort of get out other worms and do stuff with those. So I think it's pretty cool for the deck. Is it going to make the deck meta relevant? No. Worms are definitely not meta relevant in any sense of the word. They're just too slow for the format. But I do think it's kind of cool, and I like this wave of support overall. Also, there's Worm Call, not Worm Monster, but continuous spell. That's actually pretty good. It says once per turn, if your opponent controls a monster, you control no monsters. You can spell summon one reptile type worm monster from your hand and face down defense position. So this is a way to sort of either get a flip monster set up in addition to another one, or just set up your Worm Queen right away. You know, you distribute the reptile type worm monster and bring this thing out, attack in for 2700. So Worm Call, pretty good, I will say. You can also just bring out Queen or Prince themselves, but you don't necessarily want to do that because they have low defense. You'd probably want to bring out like Noble, but if you bring out Noble, your opponent will know about Noble, so then it becomes less good. So yeah, Call is okay for the deck. It can help it out in certain situations, but realistically, Worm is not going to be meta relevant, just like pretty much all the cards discussed here, except for X-Sabers. Hidden Arsenal is generally a dud, when it comes to releasing cards. But I like the flavor that they're going for a lot of the time. And I think if they stopped with their just throwing spaghetti at a wall approach, then, this would be a lot more successful. And indeed, that is what we see later on in the game's history when they actually know how to release archetype sets like this. But these weren't the only new archetypes that were added to the game. We also had a lot of anime archetypes that were added as well, or improved upon. So let's dive into those now. Interestingly enough, the anime archetypes here actually outclass pretty much all the other archetype support introduced in the Hidden Arsenal sets and things like that, which is a bit different from how that happened a lot of time in the game's history, where oftentimes anime archetypes are just sort of set up as like cool things that the characters can do in the show, but aren't really consistent or powerful enough to actually make an impact on the game. Here, though, there actually are some big things that happen, and 2 anime archetypes get fairly decent support that I will say one of them is already pretty good, but the other, it definitely becomes a lot better here and actually playable as a strategy. And the first one of those is Infernity. Now, Infernity, up to this point, they had Necromancer, they had Archfiend, which are key parts of their combo, but unfortunately, they didn't really have anything good to search out with the Archfiend. The releases in Shining Darkness changed that. And the big one that you're searching out for your end board is Infernity Barrier. It's a counter trap that says when your opponent activates a spell, trap card, or monster effect while you control a face-up attack with an Infernity monster and have no cards in your hand, negate the activation if you destroy that card. So this is an omni-negate that you can search out with Archfiend. So very, very good for cycling an end board with this thing. And if you can search these, your opponent can have a bit of a tough time breaking through your board. Another thing that you'd be searching out with the Archfiend is Infernity Launcher, a continuous spell. This is one per turn, you summon one Infernity monster from your hand to the graveyard. That doesn't really come up all too often, but it is something that you can do if you have just an Infernity cluttering up your hand and you want to get down to nothing. But you can send this card to the graveyard, then target up to 2 Infernity monsters in your graveyard to summon them. You must have no cards in your hand to activate and resolve this effect. So With Infernity Launcher, we actually get a lot of interesting combos that you can do. Because you can use something like the Infernity Necromancer to bring back Archfiend to then go for, potentially synchro plays with, like, the Archfiend and stuff. Maybe making something like Infernity Doom Dragon or 100 Eyes Dragon, which are both pretty good. Infernity Doom Dragon is a level 8, 3,000 attack point, 24 and defense point monster, made with 1 Dark Tuner, 1 more non-tuner monster. Once per turn, if you have no card in your hand, you select 1 monster opponent controls, destroy that monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half its attack. This card cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. So either you get a big guy to attack in with, or you destroy a monster your opponent controls, either of which are pretty good. 100 Eyes Dragon is the main combo enabler if you want to continue comboing off. It's made with 1 Dark Tuner and 1 more non-tuner Fiend monster. Then once per turn, you can banish 1 level 6 or lower Dark effect monster from your graveyard until the end phase. This card's name becomes that monster's original name and replaces the effect with that monster's original effects. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 Earthbound Immortal from your deck to your hand. That last part's just there for the anime, not really ever going to come up in an Infernity deck. But with this thing, you can copy like Necromancer, you can copy some of the new cards here that I will mention in a second. But it can allow you to continue your combo further. And if you get the Archfiend back in grave, you can then bring it back with more launchers. You can bring it back with, Mirage. There are many ways to bring it back and to keep your combo going. Of course, the deck is less powerful than it is in the Xyz era, where you get things like the Volvo Chain to just overlay your Archfiends with and just get them in graveyard very easily. But you can still do some of those combos in the Synchro era, and the deck is still pretty decent. So I think that's kind of cool that this deck is starting to come together now. We also got some other spawn trap support, namely Infernity Break. This is a normal trap that says if you have no card in your hand, target 1 Infernity card in your graveyard and 1 card your opponent controls, banish the first target, and if you do, destroy the second target. So it's a good piece of target removal. And you can search it out off Archfiend again. Infernity Inferno is a normal trap that is basically there to help set up your Infernity plays. It basically lets you discard up to 2 cards and then send the same number of Infernity cards from your deck to the graveyard. So this both empties out your hand, so you can actually activate your Infernity cards, and also it thins out your deck, so make you more likely to draw an Archfiend. It sets up your graveyard for Necromancer plays, for Mirage plays, for Launcher plays. So this thing is actually, it may seem really bad on the face of it, but it actually can see some play in these decks. The last of these cards is Zero Max, a normal spell. It says activate only if you have no cards in your hand. Select 1 free monster in your graveyard, spell summon it, and destroy all face-up monsters on the field with attack lower than the spell summoned monster's attack. You cannot conduct your battle phase during the same turn you activate this card. I don't see this card played in too many Infernity lists. I think it's actually kind of decent potentially, although I do understand the deck space is tight. This is another way to bring back an Infernity, and it could have a pop effect on top of that if you bring back Archfiend. But the not connecting battle phase is unfortunate. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, I guess the deck doesn't really need that, right? Like, oftentimes with Infernity, you're trying to set up an unbreakable board, and if you set up an unbreakable board, you don't really need to attack. I mean, look at Soul Charge in formats like Hat, right? That card is very, very good because you get to bring back a ton of stuff. You don't care that you're losing your battle phase, right? Infernity can't do the same thing to the same degree in this format, but Zero Max is something that you can use to potentially extend further. I think it maybe does deserve a look. It can also anti-synergize, I admit. If you bring back like an Archfiend and you've got a Necromancer, then it will pop Necromancer, but I do think it's pretty good, and I don't know, I think it's better than some of the other Infernity support that was released in this set. But they also get good monsters, which I do want to touch on, because Mirage is very, very important for Infernity decks. It's a it's a dark level 1 monster fiend. 0 attack, 0 defense. Cannot be special summoned from the graveyard. Can be special summoned from the deck, though. So if you got like 1 for 1, you can bring this thing out. And if you have no card in your hand, you can tribute this card, then target 2 Infernity monsters in your graveyard, spell summon them. So again, this is another way to bring back monsters from grave, get those Archfiend effects popping off. And yeah, this thing is very, very good for the deck. We've got Infernity Avenger as well, a level 1 Fiend Tuner. 0 attack, 0 defense. Says when a monster you control except Infernity Avenger is destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster sent to the graveyard. While you have no cards in your hand, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. In that case, the level of this card is equal to the level of your destroyed monster. So this is another way to go into synchro plays. It is a bit awkward because your opponent will know about it if they're attacking into your monsters, but it still allows you to sort of fend off a bit of damage. So that's at least nice. And it allows you to extend further if they don't have any follow-up to get rid of it. So I like this thing. I think it's pretty cool. Infernity Beetle is getting into the bit more questionable Infernity monsters, but it's still okay, I guess. Level 2 Insect Tuner, 12 attack, 0 defense. Said while you have no cards in your hand, you can tribute this card, special summon up to 2 Infernity Beetle from your deck. So there's a way to deck them. It's a way to get more synchro stuff online. So for instance, if you
have Infernity Beetle and an Archfiend, tribute the Beetle, bring out 2 Beetles, right? You sync off with 1 Beetle and the Archfiend for a 6. Let's say you've got a Necromancer or a Launcher to bring back the Archfiend. You then go into another 6. So it is a way to get, synchroing off and doing your plays. It just is a bit less good than I think some of the others in the deck. But it's still better than the last 2 Infernity monsters they released, which I don't really think are that good. Infernity Randomizer, level 1, Warrior, 9 attack, 0 defense, says 1 per turn. While you have no card in your hand, you can draw 1 card and reveal it. For a monster card drawn with this effect, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the level of that monster times 200. For a spell trap card, you take 500 damage. Now, this thing is not good in the Infernity deck. It is actively anti-synergistic with the Infernity deck. Because if you draw a monster with it, Archfiend does not get the special summon and search effect off of the randomizer. I'm pretty sure it misses timing. Also, if you draw that monster, you're stuck with that monster in hand. Like, you can't get that out of the hand, and then you can't use your other Infernity effects, which is bad. If it's a spell or trap, you take damage, which you're hoping it's a spell or trap, because then you can actually, have your Infernity effects online, but like, it's just overall not good. I know that there are some road decks in some retro formats that play randomizer as sort of a value engine, which I guess you could do, but in the context of Infernity, it's really, really bad. And I think even using it as a value engine, it's just like, you have to go down to no cards in hand. You have to bring out a very weak monster and use the effect. And then you're either taking damage to draw that monster, or to draw the spell or trap, or you're drawing a monster that you can't use the turn that you have it, unless it's like Bubble Man, I guess. But like, it just seems like you're jumping through a lot of hoops for not much value. Like, I don't know, Jar of Greed would probably get more value than this. So yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of this card. We've also got Infernity Destroyer here. We did a level 6 Dark Fiend, a 23 attack, 1000 defense. Says when this card is an opponent's monster by battle, instead of the graveyard, inflict 1600 damage to your opponent. You must have no cards in your hand to activate and resolve this effect. So it's another Infernity beater that sort of along the lines of Infernity Doom Dragon can inflict damage to your opponent, as well as being a big beater. So that's kind of cool. But realistically, Infernity, they are a combo deck, and this is kind of a brick in that combo deck. So it's not really good enough. I mean, maybe you combo with like Zero Max to like try and be a board wipe, but you just do that with Infernity Doom Dragon instead. So, you don't really need the Infernity Destroyer in the deck, and most Infernity decks don't play it. We've also got 2 other spell traps that I didn't really think were good enough to discuss with the high caliber ones up above. We've actually got 3 here, sorry. Infernity Reflector is a normal trap that says activate only by discarding all the cards in your hand when Infernity monster controls through the balance into the graveyard. Select and special summon that monster from your graveyard and inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. Now, that's not terrible, but, just like with Randomizer, like, it's kind of anti-synergistic for the deck. Now, there are going to be some cases where you just can't get rid of all the cards in your hand, and so you're like, okay, I'll set this, and then be able to use it to bring back Infernity, inflict damage, all that stuff. But there are going to be cases where you draw it and you just can't use it, right? And unlike Infernity Inferno, where you draw it and can't use it, like, okay, you can just set it, and then when you draw later on, then you can use it to just immediately pitch. This has to be specifically when an Infernity monster controls destroyed by battle, right? So it's just kind of an awkward card that goes against what the deck wants to do in a way that's more extreme than Inferno. So I don't really like it that much. Next up, we got Wave Motion Inferno, another continuous spell. It says, while you have no card in your hand, face-up Infernity monster you control gain 400 attack and defense. You can send this face-up card from your field to the graveyard. Send all cards from your hand to the graveyard. So again, this is kind of like an Inferno or something, where you get to just pitch your entire hand. But realistically, this thing is not really that good. Like, the attack boost does not matter. Really, just play this to pitch everything for your hand. But a lot of the time, you can do that anyways. And unlike Inferno, it's not reactive, so you have to do this on your turn. So it's like, I could see that as an edge over Inferno because you don't have to wait a turn for it. But like, I don't know. It's just kind of not really that good in my opinion. Next up, we got Phantom Hand, a continuous trap that says 1 per turn. If you control a face-up Infernity monster or monsters, you can remove play all cards in your hand face down until your next standby phase. So again, another card that tries to get things out of your hand. And unlike with something like Inferno or Wave Motion Inferno, this thing can allow you to get those things back. So it's like, basically the idea is like, okay, I've set up my barriers, I've set up my stuff, I use Phantom Hand, banish everything else in my hand, so now my barriers are online, things like that, and then I get those things back to use later. But realistically, like, it's not really going to come up because, 1, you have to wait a turn to use this thing. 2, Infernity is built so that way you can, like, ideally use most of the cards in your hand, or get them out of your hand in pretty value-heavy ways, right? So it's just like banishing them actively gets them out of graveyard, which is bad for the deck. Like, this thing is just not really good. I think this was an anime card, which is why it got printed here. But I just don't think it actually is as good for the deck as it might seem. Next up, we got Blackwings. Blackwings are an Edison format darling. You know, these things are very, very good in Edison, and they did get some decent support here as well. Breeze of the Zephyr is a level 3 Darkwing Beast Tuner. 11 attack, and defense. If this card is added from your deck to your hand by card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. It cannot be used as synchro material except for the synchro summon of Blackwing monster. So if you're playing with this with Whirlwind, you can bring it out pretty easily. Sure, if you search out Gale, you can just do that automatically with Gale. But Gale is limited, so they've got this here as sort of a consolation. Is it really that good? I would say maybe not, but it is something you can play if you want that further extension. We also get Ghibli, the Searing Wind. This is kind of like Battle Fader for the deck in a weird way. It says when your opponent declares an attack, a direct attack that is, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then once per turn, you switch the original attack and defense of this card until the end of the turn. So original attack is 0, original defense is 0. The idea is you bring this thing out, maybe block a direct attack, and then if it survives, you can switch to attack on your next turn, switch the attack and defense attack in. It's extension for Blackwings, I guess, in a way, but most of the time your opponent's just going to beat over it anyways. So if you want something like a Ghibli, like you probably are just better off using like Battle Fader. Although I guess you can search this off Whirlwind no matter what you summon out. So that's something for it, but I don't really think this thing is that good. We got Blackwing Gust the Back Black. This is a level 2 Dark Wing Beast, 9 attack, 14 defense. It says if you control no cards, you can special summon this card from your hand. And then if your opponent's monster attacks Blackwing monster control, the attack monster loses 300 attack during the damage step only. This thing is probably the worst of the new Blackwing monster release, if I'm being honest. I get the idea of it. It's extension, right? You control no cards, you special summon this out first thing, and then you get to do your other Blackwing plays. But the deck already has a monster like that, and that's Sirocco, right? And the effect on this thing where it reduces the attack of a monster, like, it's worse than Kalute because your opponent knows that Gust is on field, right? This is not something you pitch from hand. Your opponent knows about the Gust, so they can just play around it, right? So this thing, not good. This thing is really bad. I think it's the worst of the new Blackwing monster released here, and I don't really see any reason to play it. We do have some good spell and traps for Blackwings, though. Card for Black Feathers is a normal spell. That's a banish 1 Blackwing monster from your hand. Draw 2 cards. You cannot special summon during the turn you activate this card. You can only activate 1 card for Black Feathers per turn. So this is kind of like Allure of Darkness. It basically is just Allure of Darkness for Blackwings. Allure of Darkness, good consistency booster. This card can be a good consistency booster. If you're playing in Vayu, it sets up your banish pile even more. So there's that as well. The downside is you can't special summon the turn you activate this effect. But if you're going for a bit of a slower play, like let's say you're playing Vayu and you just want to like set up a Sirocco, right, in some back row, then this thing can be good for that. Next up, we got Blackwing Strafe, a normal spell that says send 1 Blackwing monster from your hand to the graveyard. Select 1 defensive monster your opponent controls. Send that monster to the graveyard. So, not terrible, not ideal either, but I guess you can set up graveyard plays with Vayu. You know, compared to something like the Allied Justice cards, this thing clears all those when it comes to dealing with defensive monsters. But when we're talking about Blackwing, we're kind of on another level when it comes to like the standard for the deck, and this thing I don't think really meets that standard. Next up, we got Blackwing Bombardment, a normal strat that says tribute 1 Blackwing monster to select 1 face-up synchro monster you control. This synchro monster gain attack equal to the tribute monster attack until the end phase. So another way to boost up a monster you control like Kalute. And like Kalute is hidden information, so it's not like Gust where your opponent could really play around it. We are losing a Blackwing monster to use this thing, so I don't really think that that is that good. Next up, we got Black Thunder, a normal trap that says activate only when a Blackwing monster controls destroyed by balance of the graveyard. Inflict 400 damage to your opponent for each card your opponent controls. So it's a burn card. Blackwings don't really burn. It's kind of like they're infecting Blackwings with a bit of this throw spaghetti at a wall thing that I was talking about earlier. They don't need to do that. Blackwings are already good enough, but this thing is here to provide some burn damage if you really want it. And it does pair with another card that, you know, it's pseudo Blackwing. I guess I'll discuss it now. Blackwing Dragon. The level 8 Dark Dragon. 20 attack, 2 defense is made with 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. If you would take battle damage or damage from a card effect, place 1 Black Feather counter on this card instead. This card loses 700 attack for each Black Feather counter on it. Once per turn, you can remove all Black Feather counters from this card. Then target 1 phase of monster opponent controls. That target loses 700 attack for each Black Feather counter removed. And if it does, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack lost by this effect. So this is another pseudo burn card for the deck. It's a level 8. If you're up against a burn deck, it can come up, I guess. But like, realistically, if this thing is on field, and your opponent's not just playing a burn deck, they're just not going to use effects that burn you for things, right? Most decks don't even play effects like that anyways, right? Also, if you are against a burn decks very much have the capability to just front load all their damage in one turn, right? So they can just do a bunch of damage things. I guess this thing can just stop all the instances of damage. So like there is that, but it can only do that 4 times, right? And if you're up against burn deck, they hopefully have more than 4 burn cards to hit you. But I guess it is good anti-burn, but like burn is really bad in this format too. So I guess against Frog FTK, this is decent, right? Because that is a deck that wants to burn you out, but that implies that you're setting up a board. So you're like going first, or maybe Frog FTK didn't get its start off that it wanted. And so, I don't know. I feel like that's maybe a bit wishful in terms of thinking, because you basically have to bring this out turn 1. Even for Blackwings, that's kind of hard to do. So yeah, I don't really think this thing even has a use in that case too. So things just not that good. Blackwings have better synchros to go into. It is generic, so if you really want a space in the extra deck for anti-burn stuff, you can make this, but realistically, it's better off being avoided. Lots of the Blackwing support cards: Blackwing Backlash, a normal trap that says when an opponent's monster declares into direct attack while you have 5 or more Blackwing monsters in your graveyard, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. So this is kind of neat, and you can pretty easily set up 5 or more Blackwings in your graveyard. Unfortunately, if you're playing value, that's kind of tough to meet the condition because you're constantly banishing Blackwings from your graveyard. But if you're playing pure Blackwings, this could potentially see play there. Is it a bit too situational? I'd say probably, but is it something that you can play if you want to and get some value off it? Yeah, you could. Speaking of direct attacks, we've also got Morphtronics Scramble for Morphtronics. I know that everyone was waiting for the Morphtronics supports to come out, and here it is. The normal trap says activate only when your opponent declares a direct attack while you control monsters. Negate that attack and supposed to summon 1 Morphtronic monster from your hand. So it's basically Battle Fader with extra steps, You get to choose the position of the Morphtronic monster you're bringing out, so you can set up for next turn, I guess. But the battle phase is not negated, so that means that your opponent can attack over the Morphtronic monster with another monster they control if it has enough attack, which, based on the attack stats and defense stats of most Morphtronic monsters, it very well might. So, yeah, this thing is not really what the deck needed, but it is a funny card there. I like the imagery of them scrambling to do something. We also got Morphtronic Vacuum as the new Morphtronic monster. Level 1, Wind Machine, 0 attack, 0 defense. While in attack position once per turn, you can send 1 equipped to this card to the graveyard for 500 points to your opponent. While in defensive position once per turn, you can equip 1 face-up attack position monster your opponent controls to this card. Add an equip card, and you can only equip 1 monster at a time with this card by this effect. So basically like Relinquished with extra steps. And unlike Relinquished, it doesn't actually gain the attack of the equip card. Also, the equip card is not destroyed instead of this when it would be destroyed in the battle. So this thing is removal in a way, but like Relinquished is just better than this thing, even though that does take extra steps. So yeah, not really a good Morphtronic card. Because the Morphtronics are tied with Power Tool Dragon and stuff, I figured I'd talk about Power Break here as well. The Morphtronics says activate only while you control a face-up Power Tool Dragon. Select up to 3 equipped cards on your side of the field and or in your graveyard. Return them to the deck. Inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each card returned. So Power Tool Dragon, it is sort of bringing out equipped cards constantly. That's its whole gimmick. But by activating this effect, you're going very minus on terms of card advantage. And you're also only dealing a little bit of burn damage. So it's not really going to make a difference in that way. I could see this potentially being something if like maybe you come out with Vacuum In to get, that off the field or something. Or maybe, your opponent's about to destroy a monster that you have a bunch of equip cards on. You activate this thing to at least recoup some of the value off that. But it's just not good. You go too negative for too little of a benefit. Next up, let's talk about the Synchrons. Synchrons did get some more support here. Synchronic Spore is a level 2 Earth Machine. 0 attack, 7 defense, and 1 in this card. Normal summon. You can target 1 Synchron monster in graveyard, spell summon that target, and negate its effect. So this is an instant sort of junk Synchron or junk warrior if you bring back junk Synchron. You could bring back. Actually, I don't know if you can bring back Quick Draw because it's got. Yeah, but you can bring back a variety of different things, and then go into Synchro monster right away. So this thing is pretty good for if you're, going all in on Synchrons. There was a new Synchron added as well, Charged Synchron, but I think they're just a Synchron in name only. Level 1 machine, 200, 0 attack, 0 defense. If this card is sent to the grave for Synchro summon, select 1 monster putting controls chain battle position. Not terrible, not good either. But it doesn't have an associated Charger Warrior with it, so it's just kind of there. Synchrons did get a new Synchro monster, though. Junk Destroyer, made with Junk Synchron and 1 or more non-tutor monsters. It's a 2600 attack point monster, level 8. And when this card is synchro summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of non-tuner monsters used for the synchro summon this card and destroy those targets. So I think that's a really neat effect. I feel like most synchro monsters have not really explored that element of their design space where like you can make them with more materials than is listed on the card, and this gives you a benefit for doing that. But I don't know. I feel like Synchron decks are not really that good. Maybe this will see play in decks that play Junk Synchron on its own, like non-Frog FTK versions of Frog that play Junk Synchron to get value. But I just think this thing is not really that good overall. Last, we got Flare Resonator. Another Resonator's coming out. A level 3 fire, 300 attack, 300 defense, and says a synchro monster that uses this card synchro material gains 300 attack. Is that good enough? No. I'll just say no. It doesn't really do much of an effect. It's basically a vanilla level 3 tuner with not really good stats. So that's going to do it for the anime cards coming out in this set. We've gone over all the new archetypal support, but there actually was a fair amount of type-specific and attribute-specific support as well, and that deserves its own section, so let's dive into that one now. The most important thing in this section is Spore. Spore is a thing that will be very familiar for people who have played formats soon after this, where Plant Synchro is a deck that you can play. Spore is one of the plant tuners that really make that deck tick. Level 1 plant, 4 attack, 800 defense. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish one other plant monster from your graveyard. Spell summon this card, and if you do increase the level by the level of that banished monster, you only use this effect to Spore once per duel. So it's basically like Plague Spreader Zombie for plants, which is very good. There will be another plant tuner like that coming in a later set, but right now this is pretty good on its own. Snivis is sort of an attempt to do something similar. It's a beast tuner, 1 attack, 1 defense, but it says 1 per turn you contribute 1 plant type monster to select and destroy 1 face-up monster opponent controls. 1 plant type monster on the field is destroyed while this card is in your graveyard. And pull summon this card from the graveyard, and if you do remove this card for play, it will be removed from the field. So this is another way to just have a recurable tuner. It's a bit worse than Spore because it has to happen when your plant type monster is destroyed, which often is by battle, which means that your opponent can potentially attack over this or deal with it in other ways. So it's not really that good, but it is something you can play if you want to. We got Bird of Roses to bring out more plant tuners. Then an 1800 attack, 1500 defense point plant. It says when this face-up attack position card you control is destroy the battle and opponent's attacking monster send to your graveyard, you can spell summon 2 plant tuners from your deck in defense position. So this is a good way to bring out plant tuners from your deck. Unfortunately, you can't synchro summon with just tuners, so you need to have other plants or other things as well to synchro with them. But this thing is not bad, especially being as beefy as it is. Next, we got Revival Rose, the level 4 plant, 1300 attack, 1300 defense. If a face-up level 5 or higher plant type monster is destroyed while this card's in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from the graveyard. So another recursion. So if you made a synchro boss monster that's plant, and then your opponent managed to destroy it, you get back Revival Rose that could either chump block and attack, or it's further extension for you for your other plant plays. So I like this thing, even though I think it's a bit too situational for most plant decks to play. It's kind of fun to tinker with and see if it actually does stuff. For a plant synchro monster specifically that you could use with this, we got Splendid Rose, level 6 wind, plant synchro, it was 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner, 22 attack, 2000 defense. It says 1 per turn you can banish 1 plant monster from your graveyard, then target 1 face-up monster opponent controls, have that target's attack until the end of this turn. During the battle phase, if this card attacks, you can banish 1 plant type monster from your graveyard, have this card attack until the end of the turn. If you do, this card can make a second attack during this battle phase. Is this thing that good? Not really. It's focusing a bit too much on battle to be good at this time period of the game's history, but it is a plant synchro monster you can go into. Next up, we got Blossom Bombardment, a normal strat that says when a plant type monster you control destroys an opponent's monster by battle, sends to the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the destroyed monster's attack in the graveyard. So another burn card here, another battle focused plant card. So I don't think this thing is really that good around this time period. But if you want to get really aggressive with your plays, you can do this, I guess. Moving from plants to another very popular type around this time, we've got dragons. Firstly, we got Dread Dragon, a level 2 fire dragon tuner, 1100 attack, 400 defense. So when this card's destroyed the battle and sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 level 3 or lower dragon type monster from your deck to your hand. This could either replace itself or get you a different type of dragon. So that's kind of neat. But they're better searchers. Mass Dragon's probably better because that gets it out on the field, right? So yeah, this thing is not really that good in my opinion. We've also got Golem Dragon, level 4 Earth Dragon, 200 attack, 2000 defense. It says your opponent cannot target face-up dragon type monsters for attacks except for this one. So this can protect your other dragons, but is that really that good? Probably not. It's got 2,000 defense, so that's beefy, I guess. But in order to get in defense, you have to like set it first, and then it just doesn't really do enough here, in my opinion. The last dragon I want to cover in this section is Trigon, level 3 dragon, union monster, 500 attack, 700 defense. This is 1 per turn. During your main phase, you can equip this card to a machine type monster you control. Haha, you thought I was talking about dragon support. It's actually machine support. And you can also unequip it and special summon this card in face of attack position. You do either of those because the union monster, while equipped to a monster by this effect, when the equipped monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, select and special summon 1 level 4 lower light machine type monster from your graveyard. And then, you know, the union clause where it can only be equipped with 1 union monster at a time, and if the equipped monster be destroyed, destroy this card instead, yada, yada, yada. But there's a way to sort of get other machines on field, so this could be good in like a spaceship style deck, so that's kind of cool. It's meant specifically to go with Delta Tri though, I think, which is a level 4 light machine, 12 attack, 1,000 defense. So if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, activate one of the these effects. I can't speak this late into a video. Target 1 appropriate union monster in your graveyard, equip that target to this card. Target 1 face-up light machine monster you control, shuffle that target into the deck, then draw 1 card. So, if this is equipped with like Trigon, the idea is like, okay, you're bringing back light machine, then you Delta Tri, shuffle it back. However, that doesn't actually work with the timing of this card, because the cost for Trigon is targeting. The cost for Delta Tri is targeting, right? You have to target 1 face-up light machine monster you control, and then shuffle that target in the deck, right? So I'm pretty sure what happens here is when Delta Tri attacks over an opponent's monster, it and Trigon's effect go on a chain, and if you wanted to use the shuffle effect, you would have to target before Trigon actually brought the thing back. So it doesn't actually work as well as you'd like it to. Of course, you know, if you've set things up already, then you could potentially do that, but it's just not really that good of a card in my opinion. And the combo that they're seeming to intend here, I don't think actually works. Now, the thing about this is that you don't actually really care about this combo. You care about Dragon Laser if you're playing these two, because Dragon Laser is basically Raigeki. It's a quick play spell. It says send 1 Trigon equipped to a face-up Delta Tri you control the graveyard, destroy all monster opponent controls. So something you can do is just attack Delta Tri into a monster, equip it with Trigon, Dragon Laser, send the Trigon to the grave, blow up your opponent's whole board beyond that 1 monster Delta Tri attacked over, and then get in for big damage or just get value off that. So Dragon Laser is the reason to play these two together. I think it's a bit too specific to be good, but if you do want to play this in like a spaceship style deck, you could potentially do that. Last for machines, we've got Bio Falcon, level 4 machine, 700 attack, 1200 defense. Says 1 machine type monster you control destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard while this card face up on the field. You can have 1 machine type monster with 1,000 or less attack from your deck to the hand. So there's a searcher. It did not search Delta Tri, but I don't necessarily think it's meant to. I think it's just meant to be a machine searcher. I mean, I think this is just there's not really a place for this card in the metagame right now, but like maybe if there's a deck that would take advantage of it, it could be good. But 700 attack is also not the most attack in the world either. Moving on from machines to fairies, we got Herald of Perfection here. This is basically its own sort of boss monster that makes its own sort of deck in this format that you can play as sort of a lockdown style deck. To level 6 fairy ritual monster, 1800 attack, 2000 defense. Says you can ritual summon this card with Dawn of the Herald. When your opponent activates a Spore trap card or monster effect, you can send 1 fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation if you do destroy it. So the idea behind this is you play it with a bunch of fairies, and then you just pitch those fairies to then pop what your opponent's doing. And if you use it with Herald, Dawn of the Herald, Dawn of the Herald can actually give you back more fodder, because this card is used to ritual summon a Herald of Perfection. You must also tribute monster from your hand or field to a level equal exactly 6. So it's basically like the standard ritual wording, although they have to exactly equal 6. And then when Herald of Perfection ritual summoned by this card's effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one of the monsters in your graveyard that was tributed for that ritual summon and return that target to your hand. So it basically gives you negation right away. Now, I think a combo that they sort of intended to do here is you summon Venus, Agent of Creation, I believe, and you pay 1,500, bring out 3 Mystic Shine Balls, which are all level 2, activate Dawn of the Herald, tribute all those level 2 Shine Balls to go into Herald Perfection, and then get back one of those Shine Balls. So basically with one monster, one normal summon, you're able to set up your Dawn of the Herald with a guaranteed fairy in hand. Also, if you're playing Advanced Ritual Art, you can send the Shine Balls to the graveyard for that as well to bring this thing out. So I think that this was really intended to be played with that sort of combo there. Now, is it good enough to consistently bring this thing out? I don't know. But if you are able to consistently bring this thing out first turn, it can act like a pseudo FDK in a way if you're able to shut down everything your opponent's able to do. That being said, this deck does bleed resources pretty easily, so I don't know if it necessarily can stand up to some of the other decks in the metagame. But it is a interesting deck if you want to play it, and it is here for you. Moving on to zombies. We got Pyramid of Wonders, a continuous spell that says all zombie monsters you control gain 200 attack for each monster opponent controls. If exactly one zombie monster you control and no other card would be destroyed, you can send this card to the graveyard instead. This card is okay. It does have a destruction replacement effect, so that's neat. But your opponent also knows about the destruction replacement effect, so they can play around that, right? The attack boost is also fine. But the main reason you play it is to put your opponent in a tough spot with the destruction replacement, I think. And the attack boost is just a bonus. Which is kind of what more of the attack boost cards need to do in order to actually be good for the deck. It needs to have some bonus on attack on top of the attack, and this card has that. Next up, we got Electromagnetic Shield, a continuous spell that says level 3 or lower defense position thunder type monster you control cannot be destroyed by battle. Destroy this card if you control a face-up attack position monster. So, got Battery Man on the picture. Based around thunders, so I could have covered this in the Battery Man section, but it's not a Battery Man card. It can be used for just any thunder deck. You could use it with Watts, for instance. Is this thing that good? No, it's just stalling. If you ever want to get aggressive, unless you got like Total Defense Shogun, it's not really gonna allow you to do that. And if you got Total Defense Shogun, it's not even covered by this card. So this thing not really that good. Especially in Battery Man, where they want to get their Battery Man micro cell off to then get the draw, right? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, this thing is not really that good. Moving on to fish, we've got Nimble Sunfish, a level 2 water, in the same vein of Nimble Manga. And it's 1,000 type 100 defense. When this card is short of battle and sent to the graveyard, send one fish type monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then you can special summon one Nimble Sunfish from your deck. So it's kind of like Nimble Manga, where when it's destroyed, you get to do something and then bring on another. This one is for fish. Fish is not really that good. You can't really make a cohesive strategy around fish. Unless you want to do like Coelacanth plays, but this card does not really play well with Coelacanth, so it's not really that good in my opinion. Next up, we've got Magidog. This is similar to Magic Cat, another spellcaster from a previous set based around animals. And 79 attack, 1,000 defense. It says if this card is sent to the graveyard from the synchro summon of a spellcaster type monster, you can select and add one field spell card from your graveyard to your hand. I guess that could be Secret Village of the Spellcasters if you want. It could be, Endymion, I think. I think that card's out by now. But yeah, this thing is just generally not that good in my opinion. Maybe for niche scenarios, but there are just other cards you can play instead. Key Mouse is a level 1 beast in it's a tuner. So when this card is destroyed by balance into the graveyard, you can add one level 3 or lower beast type monster from your deck to your hand. It's meant to be played with something like Lockcat, but that card's not out yet, so we can't play with that. So I don't really know what this is intended to do. Maybe they're setting up for that card, but right now this card is not really that good. Moving on to the Beast Warriors, we got Axe the Poomer, level 6 Beast Warrior, 1500 attack, 1000 defense. This card cannot be normal summon or set. This card can only be special summoned by removing from play 2 Beast Warrior type monster in your graveyard. Once per turn, you can discard 1 Beast Warrior type monster to activate one of the following effects. Double this card's attack until the end phase, or this card can attack your opponent directly this turn. So kind of a neat card. Unfortunately, it's very vulnerable on your opponent's turn. And yeah, I guess it's extension, so that might be a reason to play it. But if you're playing it for just its on-field benefits, it's not really that good in my opinion. The other Beast Warrior monster I want to talk about here is Hunter of Black Feathers, level 4 Beast Warrior. While your opponent controls 2 or more face-up monsters, all the same type, you can summon one card from your hand to the graveyard. Select and destroy one face-up monster your opponent controls. So this is not really a card for type support, sort of anti-type support, because it counteracts decks that all play of the same type. So that's kind of cool. However, if you're worried about a deck that plays all the same type, I think there are probably other cards that you can do instead to deal with that. Like Hunter is kind of a bit too specific. Before we move on to attribute support, I want to talk about Chaos King Archfiend, which needs a Fiend type tuner to make, so I figured I'd mention it here. But this isn't really type support. It's a level 7, 2600 attack, 2600 defense point monster. So when this card declared an attack, you can switch the current attack and defense of all face-up monster opponent controls until the end of the battle phase. So kind of a neat effect. However, with 2600 attack, the attack and defense you switch isn't probably going to end up mattering all too much. So yeah, it's not really that good of a card in my opinion. Moving on to the attributes, though, we get some interesting stuff here. We got Elector, Sovereign of Birds, level 6, Winged Beast, 24 attack, 2000 defense. If your opponent controls 2 or more face-up monsters with the same attribute, kind of like with Hunter Black Feathers, but with attributes. Once per turn, or you can special summon this card from your hand. And then once per turn, you can target one face-up card on the field. That target's effective negated this turn. And then there can only be one face-up Elector, Sovereign of Birds on the field. So Neat card. Is it good enough? No, I think it's a little bit too niche. And, if you're citing this against decks that are all of the same attribute, I don't even think it's that good, right? It's extension, kind of like Act the Poomer. So if you want to use it to extend into your plays, that's fine. But realistically, I don't really think this thing is the best. Because on-field effect is not really I don't know, it just doesn't really do too much, I think, in a format like this, especially at slow effect speed. Moving on, we've got Fairy Archer. This is a light support card. 400 attack, 600 defense. So during your main phase, you can inflict 400 damage to your opponent for each face-up light monster control. This card cannot attack during the same turn you activate this effect. Only one Fairy Archer can have its effect activated per turn. So, you can do light burn stuff, even though light decks aren't really focused around burn. This card can do that for you. We got the Fountain in the Sky as well for another light card. It says when a light monster is destroyed by battle to the graveyard, you can banish that monster, gain life points equal to its attack. So this is more in line with what decks often do, where they gain life points. And it paired with like Ancient Sacred Wyvern, for instance, which would go to pretty absurd attacks if you manage to gain a life. But like I feel like there are other ways to gain life in this deck, and actively like banishing cards from your graveyard might not be the best thing for a light focused deck. Now, speaking of light focused decks, we also have a chaos focused monster here, Chaos Goddess, level 8 light monster, made with 1 light tuner and 2 or more non-tuner dark monsters. So this is basically a chaos synchro, right, where you have to use lights and darks to make it. And then once per turn, you can send 1 light monster from your hand to the graveyard, then target 1 level 5 or higher dark monster in your graveyard to summon that monster, but it cannot be used as synchro material. So, it recurs monsters from your graveyard for you, but like it's just awkward because if you're using 2 or more non-tuner dark monsters, they likely won't be level 5 or higher. So you won't be able to bring back one of those that you synchroed with it. And it's just kind of awkward. You also can't use that monster synchro material, which is one of the main reasons for extension like this in this format. I guess you could bring back like Chaos Orc if that had been destroyed and then banish some more stuff, but like I don't know, it seems very awkward. I don't think this card is that good, even though the art on this thing is very, very cool. Moving on, we've got things that are sort of anti a given attribute. Leeching the Light is the big one. There's a normal spell that says select 1 face-up light monster your opponent controls. All face-up attackers and monsters you control gain attack equal to the attack of the select monster until the end phase. This card is a very good pick against certain light decks in future formats. This format, there isn't really a light deck that is that threatening. But if one ever arises, this card is a good side deck card for it. Chaos Trap Hole is a counter trap that says when a light or dark monster or monsters would be summoned, pay 2,000 life points, negate the summon of the light or dark monsters, and if you do, banish it. So this is good against a variety of decks. This is basically Solemn Warning before Solemn Warning a lot of the time, especially because light and dark monsters are very common in the game. So this thing is actually pretty good, often as a side deck card against certain decks. And yeah, very powerful. We've also got Crevice in the Different Dimension, the normal trap that says declare 1 attribute and select a total of 2 monsters with that attribute from the graveyard. Remove those monsters from play. So this is very good against frogs. It's very good against, I could imagine, Bayou as well. There are a lot of different decks that this is good against, and this is very, very good as a side deck card against those decks. So I recommend playing this and adding it to your side deck in this format. But yeah, that's going to do it for the type-specific and attribute-specific cards. Now, there are some more cards released in between Edison and Frog, but I couldn't really find a way to fit them into the frameworks that I had set up here. So let's just dive into them as a sort of miscellaneous catch-all at the end. Now, most of these miscellaneous cards are just really, really bad. However, Into the Void is the exception. This thing does see play in certain deep draw decks. The normal spell is that if you have 3 or more cards in your hand, draw 1 card. And if you do during the end phase of this turn, discard your entire hand. So this actually can be good in like Infernity, potentially, because you discard your entire hand. But it's mainly just used in like deep draw decks. So if you want to just have another way to draw on top of everything else, and you're planning on getting rid of everything in your hand anyways on this one combo, this card is good for you. If not, you can probably avoid it pretty safely. It's not the only card that draws cards in this set, although Synchro Rejection does draw for your opponent. This is a normal trap that says select 1 face-up synchro monster your opponent controls and remove from play. Then your opponent draws 1 card. So not terrible, not really that good either because you're giving your opponent a card. But if it's against Infernity, that's actually really good because then it can shut off some of their stuff, which is kind of funny. This is not the only sort of synchro counter in this format. We've also got Intercept Wave, a quick play spell that says all synchro monsters on the field will change its defense position, and then return all face-up synchro monsters to the extra deck during the end phase. So this can protect you from battle there, and also just bounce back a bunch of your opponent's synchros. Unfortunately, it's sort of dual stage nature is kind of awkward because, like, let's say you're doing it on your turn and you want to, like, get rid of all your opponent's synchros. If you have any synchros out, that will get rid of your synchros too, and you won't be able to actually make any synchro plays without those synchro monsters getting bounced back at the end phase. So it's like, it puts a damper on your turn as well. But I think it's a clearly spell because you're meant to use it in your opponent's turn, stop their synchro monster from attacking in, and then bounce back everything. So then the board's clear for you to do your stuff on your turn. So that way it's kind of nice because if you use it on your opponent's turn, they can't really do any main phase 2 synchro plays. But it is just kind of a very specific card compared to some of the other, battle stoppers in the format. Next up, we get Memory Crush King, a level 5 Fiend, 2,000 attack, 0 defense. It says, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, remove to play all synchro monsters from your opponent's graveyard, and inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent for each monster removed. This can be very good against something like Vayu, I can imagine. But unfortunately, it needing to be done by a direct attack is kind of awkward, especially when this thing is pretty weak on its own. So I don't think this thing is that good. It's a bit too niche for its own good. Next up, we got Trust Guardian, a level 3 Light Fairy Tuner. 0 attack, 8 defense. So this card cannot be used as a synchro material monster except for the synchro summon a level 7 or higher synchro monster. Once per turn, that synchro monster cannot be destroyed by battle. Each time this effect is applied, synchro monster loses 400 attack and defense till the end, at the end of the damage step. So that's kind of a neat card. It can protect your monster from being run over. So if you've got like Stardust Dragon that can protect against destruction effects, this thing can protect it from being destroyed by battle, by other means. However, it's a bit too specific for my liking, and I don't really think it's that good overall. So this thing is probably a pass if you're looking for a good tuner. Charian Motto is next, level 2 plant tuner. 7 attack, 4 defense. Says when this card is destroyed by balance of the graveyard, you can supposed to summon up to 2 mono monsters from your deck. They cannot be used as synchro material monsters this turn, but that's fine because it's probably going to be destroyed by battle on your opponent's turn, and this gives you another plant tuner. I could cover this in the plant section of the video, but it doesn't actually require you to play a plant deck, kind of like how Trust Guardian doesn't necessarily require you to play it in a fairy deck. It's kind of just a card that can do its own thing. Of course, if you're playing it in a plant deck, it probably gets better. But if you just want a monster to bring out more tuners from the deck, then this thing is a thing you can play. Synchro Magnet is a level 3 Earth Machine Tuner, 1,000 attack, 600 defense. So this card cannot be normal summon or set. When you synchro summon a synchro monster, you can supposed to summon this card from your hand. So if you want to extend into further synchro plays, you can use this. But there are other better extension methods to do instead of that, so I don't think this thing is the best. Next up, we got Vice Dragon. Speaking of extension from hand, we got level 5 Dark Dragon, 2,000 attack, 24 defense. If only your opponent controls a monster, you can spell summon this card from your hand, like Sidra, but its original attack and defense become half. So it's basically worse Cyber Dragon. Like, why not just play Cyber Dragon? Cyber Dragon's at 2 now, so you can play it, and you probably don't want to play like 3 Cyber Dragon anyways. If you do, you don't want to play this as the 3rd, so not really that good. Next up, we got Card Breaker. Another card that needs to be special summoned from hand. Level 2 Warrior, 1 attack, 9 defense. It actually can't be normal summon or set, and it can only be special summoned in face-up attack position by sending 1 card from spell trap zone to the graveyard. So this is further extension, but again, there are other better extenders in the format, in my opinion. Next up, we got Damage Gate, another way to special summon things out. A normal trap that says when you take battle damage, target 1 monster in your graveyard with attack less than or equal to the amount of damage you took, special summon that target. So it's basically damage condenser, but from graveyard instead of from deck. You also don't have to pitch a card for it. And I think because it's from graveyard, it's a bit more restrictive than something like damage condenser is. There are maybe decks that can play it to good effect, but it requires a pretty specific scenario to actually come up. So I don't really think it's that good. Next up, we got Testudo Errant Newman, which is one that you can always summon off Damage Gate if you take damage. 0 attack, 18 defense. And it says neither player can special summon monsters with 1800 or more attack. So the way to, sort of fight back against the special summon Scourge. Although other cards I've talked about here, it only really stops Vice Dragon, which I believe will get stopped because its attack is 2,000, even though it gets halved when it hits the field. So this is a good way to lock down the game, I guess. If you can protect this thing, it can be annoying for your opponent to deal with. We've also got Corridor of Agony, a continuous spell that says monsters that were special summoned from the main deck cannot activate their effects. Their effects are negated, and they cannot declare an attack as long as they remain face up on the field. So this is like Gladiator Beast counter, I guess. But like, there are better Gladiator Beast counters in my opinion. So I don't really think this thing is the best. But, if you wanted a side deck card against Glad Beast, I guess you can put it in there. We also got Silent Graveyard. Speaking of just things that shut down decks. Quick play spell that says discard 1 card. Effects that activate in the graveyard this turn are negated. So they're basically Abyss Dweller before Abyss Dweller. So, a good card if you're up against a graveyard focused deck. but it is kind of niche, and I think that there are probably better cards that can fight against those graveyard style decks, like, you know, Crevice from a Different Dimension, for instance. Next up, we got Guard Mind. In normal trap, this is activate only when a card is activated when it's in effect. That would target and destroy one monster you control, negate the effect, and destroy that card. Then inflict 500 damage to your opponent. So another way to stop what your opponent's doing. And this is not a counter trap, so that can be a potential downside to this. But it is a pretty decent card overall. My Body's Shield is probably a little bit better, but if you want to play this, you know, sure, you can go for it. Next up, we got Wild Tornado, a normal trap that actually can destroy a card on field. A normal trap that says target one face-up card in the Spore trap zone, destroy that face-up card, then its controller can set one Spore trap from their hand. If this set card is destroyed instead of the graveyard, target one face-up card on the field, destroy that target. This is clearly a take on Dust Tornado, except it's much, much worse in pretty much every way. It can only target face-ups, which are not necessarily the most threatening cards in this format, although Mass Driver, I guess, is a face-up spell trap, but if you're able to set this against Mass Driver, you know, like, you know, you're already probably in a fine spot. But it also gives your opponent benefit by allowing them to set a card from hand. The only really benefit this has over Dust Tornado is if your opponent destroys it. But if your opponent would be destroying something like Dust Tornado, you can just chain Dust Tornado, right? And so it doesn't even have value there, really. So this thing is just not good. Next up, we got Power Frame, which is a face-up card that Wild Tornado can destroy. Because even though this is a normal trap, it's like Kunai with Chain. Equipped to a card. It said when a face-up monster you control is targeted for an attack by a monster with a higher attack, target the attack target, negate the attack. If you do equip this card to that target, the equipped monster gains attack equal to the difference between this attack and the attack of an attacker when this card resolves. So this is a way to negate attack, also give your monster a boost, which is neat. Unfortunately, that boost will only tie it with whatever monster is attacking into it, but it's still kind of cool. I figured I'd mention it here. Next up, we got Assault Spirit, another normal trap equipped card. It says after activation, treat this card as an equipped card and equip it to a monster you control. Once per turn during the equipped monster's attack, you can send one monster with 1,000 or less attack from your hand to the graveyard during the damage step to have the equipped monster gain the attack of the sent monster until the end phase. This basically turns every monster in your hand with 1,000 or less attack into Colute. But it's much worse than Colute because Colute actually gives you a meaningful amount to gain. This does not. And also you lose a monster that maybe would have had more value through something else. Like part of the reason why Colute's so good is because you can search it very easily off Whirlwind. So you're basically not losing too much value by using Colute. Here though, you actually are losing probably a fair bit of value. So I don't think the thing is that good. But speaking of things that equip things to them, Transforming Spear is a level 3 winged beast, 1 on attack, 1 on defense. It says one per turn, you can target one face-up defensive monster your opponent controls, discard one card, and equip that target to this card. You can only equip one monster at a time to this card with this effect. This card gains the attack of the equipped monster. If this card attacks, it changes defense position at the end of the battle phase. And then during the end phase, the monster equipped to this card by this card effect is spell summoned to your opponent's side of the field in face of defense position. So this thing is just bad. This thing is really bad. This thing is basically relinquished at home if home was like a shack in the woods that was falling apart. Like this thing is just really bad. Yes, it can be used as pseudo removal, but it gives back your opponent whatever you take. And so it's just like not that good. Like, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it besides it being fake removal, and they're just better cards you can play instead. Next up, we've got Second Booster, another card that can boost the attack of a card. Level 3 Fire Machine, 1,000 attack, 500 defense. So you can tribute this card to select one phase of attack which is a monster you control. A selected monster gains 1500 attack until the end phase. So that's a decent boost, but it requires a summon for this thing, most likely a normal summon. And there's better cards you could probably have summoned instead to get over whatever you need to get over or deal the damage you need to deal this turn. Next up, we got Rapid Warrior, a level 4 warrior, 1200 attack, 200 defense. So during your main phase 1, you can activate this card's effect. If you do, it can attack your opponent directly this turn. Other monsters cannot activate or cannot attack during the turn you activate this effect. This is a takeoff speed warrior, it seems like, but it just seems really bad. Like, I mean, Watt Giraffe has the same amount of attack and can attack directly. It also has a benefit on top of it. So why not just play Watt Giraffe instead of this if you're planning on playing this? Because it's a road to target, maybe? I don't know, but yeah, this card is not good. And I said Watt Giraffe wasn't good, but Watt Giraffe makes this thing look terrible. Like, and that just shows how bad this thing is. Next up, let's talk about Tyrant Neptune. This card will eventually get banned. As of this point, it is not banned. The level 10 Water Reptile, 0 attack, 0 defense. Cannot be special summoned. You contribute this card by tributing one monster. This card gains the total original attack and defense of the monster it's tributed for its tribute summoned. When this card tribute summoned, target one effect monster in the graveyard that was tributed for the tribute summon. This card name becomes that target name, and this card gains that target's effect. So Mainly you're using this to tribute 2 monsters to get a bigger monster with the same effect as one of them, right? Eventually this will be used for very degenerate purposes, but in this format, it's not really that good. There aren't really many use cases for it. Next up, we got Half Shot, a quick play spell that says target 1 face-up monster on the field. It cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. Also, its attack is halved until the end of this turn. So another way to protect your monster from battle. Is it the best way to do it? Yeah, maybe not. But is it a way you can do it? Sure. Lastly, we got Archfiend Interceptor, a level 4 Dark Fiend, 14 attack, 16 defense. Says while you control his face-up attack position card, when opponent's monster declares an attack, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. It's a burn card. It's a burn card with a weak amount of attack that needs to be an attack to use effect. So I hope that is enough to show why this card's not good. I guess I could have covered it in archetypes because it is an Archfiend card. So if you're playing Archfiends, you can do stuff with it, I guess. But it's not really an Archfiend card because it doesn't go with that deck. It's just called an Archfiend, right? So with that, that will do it for all the new cards added from Edison to Frog format. A lot of them not really that relevant, right? Again, the main meta deck for this format, or the deck that defines the format at least, will basically mainly use cards that came up before, with the exception of 1 card. And the other decks that do arise, with the exception of like Infernity, I'll say, generally also use largely what came before it. Like X-Sabers, it gets Darksoul and Bargain Knight, that's all it adds. If you want to do a Herald deck that's basically just made with Herald and the Ritual spell, and that's like all you add to that. Plants really just get Spore. Like, Infernity is the only one that gets a ton of new things that you're playing in the deck. But other than that, the new cards are not really that important or impactful. But, sometimes you have formats like that. Konami, I think, over time was sort of adjusting its pack building philosophy. And we're still at the time where like they're trying to figure things out. They're trying to make it so that things are powerful enough that you want to get the packs, but not everything is too powerful. So that way you can still have fun playing around with them in like draft formats or with friends or whatever. That being said, if you're looking for a fun format to play with friends, this is probably not it. And to illustrate why that is, let's look at an example deck list of Frog FTK to actually talk about what makes it tick and why it's so dominant. So this is a Frog list that was made by Christopher Schwartz. I believe it was from SJC Indianapolis in 2010. And it actually did relatively well in that event. Didn't win the event. The event was actually won by Anti-Meta Stun, if you'd believe that. Another deck that you could play in this format, but that didn't really get any new cards in this format. So the big addition to this deck is just Ronintoadin. And when you have Ronintoadin, you can make this deck work, because if you can get a Substoad on field with another monster as well, which you very easily can, because you've got things like 1-for-1, you've got things like Swap Frog, which can special summon itself out, you've got Fishboard Blaster, which can special summon itself out. What you do is you just substitute through your whole deck. You use Swap Frog to set up some Ronintoadins in grave, or you could use like Foolish Burial to set up Ronintoadins in grave. And you basically go through the entire deck. You set up some Poison Draw Frogs in a way that you can send them to grave with the Swap Frogs, which you can get back Swap Frogs with things like Salvage and things like that. And when you send the Poison Draw Frogs to grave with the Swap Frog effect, you get a draw because it will not miss timing. And those draws get you deeper into your win con of the Mass Driver here to then tribute off a bunch of Ronins or a bunch of Fishboard Blasters or what have you, and just kill your opponent with that. Now, there are counters to this. There are things like Hanawata, right, which is a hand trap that you discard it and you don't take damage, effect damage at least for the rest of the turn, which can put a hamper on the strategy. But part of what makes Frog so good is that if you do anticipate that you're going to get stopped by something like a Hanawata or something like that, you can still set up a really good board. Like, Dupe Block is a thing that is very good in Edison format because it's just very hard for a lot of decks to deal with. If you set up dupes with also flip-flops, with potentially Unifrogs coming into play as well, like, that is a pretty formidable board that your opponent to deal with, right? So even if they stop the Frog FTK, the deck can pivot into just setting up a hard board to break and then just slowly whittling down your opponent's stuff over the course of a couple turns. So this thing is just such a disgusting deck. And I say disgusting, like, because it can just do so much and be so dominant, and it really does take over the format. Even if it's not the best deck, you're probably going to play against this in whatever Frog formats you play against, and it's probably going to be pretty good, and you're probably going to have a fair amount of non-games that are not fun, right? Now, there are other ways to stop this deck. Things like DD Crow can also stop it. If you're going first against this deck, you can potentially set up some interruption to stop it. So, it's not the end of the world, And this deck did not win the event that, the format based around, as I mentioned earlier. But, it has won events since that have been held in the format. And even if it hasn't won those events, it's also done very good in those events too. So it's kind of tough. It can also smokescreen side into just a more standard deck, more standard frog deck. I don't know if this side is necessarily like the most optimal side deck that you can go into, but there are some interesting things you can do. And the deck is just strong. I will be having a video up on the channel soon about me, playing a lot of games with this deck in a frog tournament that we held a month or two back. That's just how far behind I am on these videos. And I think that when you see those games, you'll see like how oppressive this deck can be, because I also was going into it as not the best frog player, right? I had really picked up the deck for the first time. I'd done some combos, right? Combo testing in solo mode. But I wasn't really too keyed in on a lot of the lines. And a lot of them I was able to figure out as we played. And a lot of them just like played themselves. And it was just, if I as a beginner could do that well with this deck, I can only imagine someone who's like put in hours and hours of work into this deck playing in an event like that could do with it. So yeah, this thing is scary. And I think it makes it so that frog format will not really get played too much. I'm glad that we're covering it on the channel because I do think it's a unique time in the game's history. But frankly, it's not a time that people will be itching to revisit anytime soon. But that's going to do it for the guide. I gave you a bit of a taste of what's to come with the Frog FTK video that I'm going to do. But that might be the only video I do for Frog format, because the format after this, which is called X-Saber format on Format Library, is called Revolution by some other people, and there's debates over what to name it. But that format, I think, covers a lot of the decks that you can play in Frog format, but just, without a lot of the non-games that Frog FTK being present actually provides. So I will save more decks for that time. And that's going to do it for this video. If you like what you saw here and want to look into more Frog FTK videos, then definitely subscribe to the channel. If you want to play an event in maybe Frog format or other formats I've featured on the channel, head on over to the YGF from Zero Discord server, linked in the description down below. If you want to support me directly, I have a Patreon as well. If you join the Patreon and get shout out in these videos, so big shout outs to Rincewind, Portrait, Brent Knocker, Tyler Compton, GMYFS, Dumbtruck, Scout Zero, and Damon Hassett. It means a lot that you all support me this way and encourage me to make more videos like this one, even if they've been coming out more sporadically in the recent past. But that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben for YGF from Zero, signing off. Peace.